Shinji and Warhammer40k, Chapter 38, All Along the Watchtower, Part 4. Heads up guys, there's a part in this that doesn't exactly translate well to audio reading. I'm going to try and do my own thing with it, but I just want to let you guys know. You should probably read the chapter on your own after you finish watching it, obviously, because it is a big holy shit moment, but I just want to let you know, it's pretty cool what the author did with this particular moment. I'll try and make it epic for you all. I just want to let you know it doesn't exactly translate well to audio. Constantine was a celebrated name, similar to Alexander, and thus a popular name for boys. There was nothing particularly noteworthy about Valda, for as far as he knew, his family had been farmers and small-scale merchants even back unto the days of Alexandrus. He was Macedonian, though the divisions between Macedonian and Greek had blurred after impact. Many of Greece's ancient historical sites, and whole islands besides, had vanished under the Mediterranean. Those who remained had to endure the collapse of global trade, the disruption in climate, and pirates and raiders all through the region. He was born big. That was for many years his only virtue. He could pull as much as any ox or horse, and that was why in his youth he was known as the Bull. With his sheer strength he tried to keep his father's farm going, ploughing the fields alongside the animals. This wasn't enough. The new government practiced little more than organised banditry. He was the third son, and though his brothers were strong, not even the eldest had his might. Were it not for the clear resemblance to their father, he would have seemed utterly out of place. He had sisters. He had avenged what happened to one of them, the youngest and most beautiful, and for the bloodbath he had left he was called the Skull Thrower. He had to flee, for strength against drunken men was less use against bullets of awake soldiers. If the government was stealing from the people, then those who stole from the government would be patriots, right? He joined up with actual bandits for a while, but found that life was just as distasteful. Everyone was hateful, there was no justice, nowhere in the land. 3 years after impact, the UN brought order back to Greece. He had returned to his old home to find it burnt to the ground and his family nowhere to be found. Had his murder of the local boss so long ago provoked such punishment? It turned out there was nothing personal, it was just the unfortunate site for battle. It had been abandoned long before then. His brothers had been conscripted into the army. Against a force trained by Yang they were dead. His sisters, they had done well enough all considering, though the next youngest too had died of some illness. They had married men of low but honest standing, and didn't need him anymore. There was nothing left for him to do. He didn't want to settle down and find a wife, for he was young, and with peace returned there was so much of the world to see. Though the UN swept in to put a less corrupt government into place, there were still bandits and pirates about. He became a mercenary. He was good with heavy weapons, and his fists when necessary. They called him Hercules, which was a Roman name. It should be Heracles, but he supposed no one, not even him, really gave a damn. But none of that mattered anymore. He lived from day to day, fighting, drinking, whoring, until he found his way into eastern Turkey. He was hired to guard a small expedition up Mount Ararat. He was orthodox, but didn't really see anything special about the trip. When he saw who was leading the effort, it seemed like just another rich boy's holiday. It was he who first called the boy Alexandrus Reborn, the protector of man. In his name they had fought the fallen, the mutant, the undead, the heretic, and the traitor. He was proud to serve as the first and final guardian for mankind's hope. The Ava was incidental. The terror that rates beyond the stars, that was why humanity had to be united. The legacy of the ancients was fear and suffering. He was sent with Soryu. Why? Had he failed in his devotion to the cause? Had his strength faltered somehow? He had raged, he had shouted, and he had obeyed. He could break the boy with one hand, but that will he could never bend. He would protect Soryu and all she valued, with his life if necessary. Nothing else mattered. He was Heraclitus, the first of his chosen. He needed to be by Soryu's side. That was the duty of the custodian and bodyguard. That was the command. He screamed in fury. "We are going off course!" Castle Sturmbrand was in a slow descent curving away from Gotha. What the hell was the point of going with Soryu if she'd just jump out of her goddamn castle and be the first in a battle? On one hand, he could respect that. The girl had balls of cast iron, big ones in her desk drawer. On the other, she had totally stolen his move. "No! Turn! Someone turn this thing back!" Yamagishi was a sweet girl, but she was practically useless then. It was the best she could do not to bring them to fiery doom. Each Terminator weighed nearly a ton, but they had drop pods for parachuting into battle. Useless unless they were all for the battlefield, and even if they dropped exactly right then, they'd still have to walk or find a truck in. The Land Raider was too heavy to airdrop. Then he spotted one of the Raytail canisters used to assist the launch of Tempest gunships. The VTOLs weighed several dozen tons, did they not? The rocket assist takeoff canisters helped fling them out of the hangar. Dr. Thompson coughed up blood. The Air Control Centre was a ruined mess, and they had to move to the hangar as that section had opened up into the strong air. Without Unit 2's strong AT field, the difference between inner and outer hull's atmospheric pressures was tearing the Zeppelin into pieces. The technicians were busy trying to keep the castle from falling apart. One of the Heraclitus, already in full armour, approached him.
"You seem like a smart guy. Mind helping me out?"
The Terminator asked in the harsh mechanical rumble so indicative of his sort.
"How should I strap this thing?"
In his hands was a Raytail rocket, rated for 3,000 pounds of thrust. The nerve scientist blinked. He took off his glasses and tried again. "You've got to be kidding."
"This is taking too long. Look, either help us out with this, or we're going to try and power drop one of the Hummers and take you with us."
That solved the problem of finding transport towards the battle, though it meant most of the other Heraclitus would have to wait for landing and try to catch up with the Land Raider. Wait, you do realise that even vehicle airdrops are done a short distance away from the ground at almost stall speeds, instead of from this high up and at half the speed of sound?
"We've done it before!"
He meant the airdrop, at low height and low speeds. "You're insane," the young scientist said dully. "I'm insane," he remarked later, while helping the Heraclitus with their impromptu jetpacks. The few engineers he could rope into helping were disturbingly enthusiastic about the process.
"Deep striking!"
yelled Constantine and two others before throwing themselves out of the Zeppelin. Twin streaks going off into the distance marked their overture into the maelstrom of battle. The third had presumably gone into a death spin. Dr. Thompson groaned. He went over to a secure chair, took off his glasses and clutched his head and grit his teeth and let himself be absorbed into the darkness of total helpless frustration, silently mouthing curses at the universe. He didn't even feel the crash. The Cradle threw everything at them, anything to slow down Sawyer and buy a few more moments to prepare. How the situation so reversed would have been laughably ironic were it not so pathetic. The Cradle could have ignored the fallen castle Sturmbrand. The Tempest gunships could finally skirmish against the Ashima battle pods. Their las cannon proved to have a superior firing rate, as their flight mode didn't require a significant proportion of power just to stick it to physics. The Ashima proved to be slightly more agile, but the VTOL craft had turreted guns. With shortened reach, the Cradle was free to send out a vast killing blow. Dragons were meant more as terror weapons, and being self-maintaining. There were things like bats that were flying bombs, but thankfully did not very fast. The Cradle still didn't know how to make bomb scarabs like that which Layla had used. The bomb bats, however, could serve like flying mines to bar airspace. With these, a few Ashima actually got through the air groups and at the ground Zeppelin. They transformed in mid-drop, for a Land Raider was crumbling out of the wrecked cargo deck, a sweet, sweet target. There was a whip crack and a black blur, and two of the Ashima mechanoids fell out of the sky. They were mangled pieces when they hit the ground. There was a great savage hiss, and from the darkness of Castle Sturmbrand 2 points of light glowed. Another pair of cracks, blurry motion, and two more of the white-shelled shapes were pulled towards the Zeppelin, only to smack into each other near the opening. So hard did they hit that the shells had fused together into a misshapen lump. Twin snakes slithered back into the dark. The Ashima had transformed back to their pod-like shapes and fired blindly in. Unfortunately, because their weapons were hard-mounted in that form, this meant they had to drift about in place. Easy pickings. Ava Unit 3 emerged from Castle Sturmbrand, its mouth open in a leer. Again its arms blurred, vanishing from sight for a moment. Now there were repeated cracks. One by one the enemy fell. Their beam guns left deep pits in Evangelion armour, but otherwise failed to do any harm. Crack, crack! That sound comes from the tip of a whip, travelling faster than sound. A bright green flash stuck at its AT field. Castle Sturmbrand answered in turn with a full las cannon barrage. More of the enemy's flying units arrived, and on the ground was a literal carpet of onrushing Vorhounds. Unit 3's arms flowed back into shape, and Mayumi Yamagishi made it reach out with palms downwards. Her AT field squished the enemy, blood spreading and trickling down into a lull as a stinking acidic stream. Slowly, hunched over and hissing, the Ava walked to join its partner. The forces of the Cradle parted as it approached. They knew futility. In good time, Castle Sturmbrand managed to get its weapon system back online. Though they no longer had the S2 engine to draw upon, the battle screen snapped into place and would hold for a good while. The sheer toughness of its armour was already legendary to its enemies. They had little to fear. Miraculously, the two Heraclitus did manage to survive deep striking into the battle, deploying their multi-layered parachutes once the rockets had run out. The third also managed to survive, though he crashed through several buildings. The wood sapped away enough of his momentum, though he had several broken bones even through the tactical dreadnought armour. The Cradle had to create brutes in mass amounts as their response to the Terminators. They were a poor match for the originals. Beneath the armour was muscle, subject to the square cube law, unlike the Avas, which were in effect personifications of altered space. The Heraclitus tossed them around and broke their formations like bowling pins. They now had, in his name, power claws. It didn't take too long. The Cradle had to shorten its reach even more and fortify their own positions. As the world had expected, it would be settled as a contest of gods and giants. Sister Luministra trembled in the cold air. Her bony grip was weak and her steps hesitant. For the first time, ever since birth, she was truly blind. She had burned out her talents in directing that single strand of probability that formed a psychic shield. She was an old woman now, useless, frail. Her eyes were blank and misting over with tears. Was it worth it? The Mayor and the Colonel had been correct. The Cradle would have just let them walk out of there, all the way down to Austria if they so wanted. The price was the Psykers who kept them safe. Have they been selfish in their own way? She couldn't see anything, but she could smell the death in the air. They were also misled. The power of the Cradle was not infinite. The population of Germany was a recovering 60 million out of impact, and many still survived in the untouched southern regions. If the Cradle had won, if they had enough of an edge to defeat the Evangelions who have come to purge them, nothing could save those remaining. Her people had been sacrificed again at the altar of warfare. The Undying had, as the true Book of the Dead warned, burnt in the fires of the vengeful sun. "You're afraid, Michael?" She'd felt his muscles of his arms stiffen. "What is it?" The answer was in how the ground itself trembled, and the nearby heavy crunch of boulders giving way. The air felt even colder. "The God Machine," Feckle Draft whispered, grimacing. He had to look up, so far his neck pained. His mind screamed at the sheer size of the monstrosity. Its mere existence was an affront to the natural order. It was a living blasphemy. How could anyone ever get used to it, to enjoy it, to revere it? He had trained Shinji Akagi, but though he had recognised the compelling quality in the boy, he'd never really understood how anyone could twist whole nations into compliance. Now he understood. Unit 2's shadow stretched across Gotha. Even the old fortress seemed like a sandcastle to its girth. In abbreviated Titanicus armour, it had a hunched over and even more bestial air. Blood-red paint gave stark contrast against the clear blue sky. Unit 3 joined it eventually, and together their AT field scoured miasma from tens of kilometres around. The Cradle's power was subtle. This was not. It was raw, savage and hot. "It is the sound and the fury, even if for now it serves," the monk muttered. Control over such a beast could only ever be an illusion. Castle Sturmbrand remained the fallen, wounded thing. They had gutted it, brought to Gotha almost anything that may be useful. Food, specially. Weapons next. The cargo considerations for these were an afterthought. In fact, they brought too much, so inconsequential was their weight compared to what Teplin had to bear from its own shell. Asuka Langley saw you. She was smaller than they expected. Cuter, too. Her eyes were still red from angry tears. She was an Ava pilot. Shinji Kari's equal in many ways, and his others his superior. She'd often looked on with a mixture of disdain and disbelief at the blatant worship Tokyo 3, and other parts of the world, directed towards her chosen companion. But now she was on the receiving end of it. She had no idea what to do. This adulation, this outpouring of gratitude, it was for so long the very thing she'd worked for, had alienated so many just for the knowledge that some day all would have to acknowledge her prowess. And now it was here. It tasted like ashes.
"No!
You have been very brave, she answered tightly. Get up! I'm just a girl. You saved yourselves! It was far harder than she had thought. I can enjoy this. I can convince myself of this being my rightful due. But it was a luxury she couldn't afford. Delusion and contrivance could only make her weak, and it was her power that earned her the place in the sun. She reached town to take a fistful of dirt. It was dry, crumbly and grey. More than just biomass, the Cradle had leached the very life from her lands. Asuka tossed it aside, and people recoiled from the plume of dust. Who's in charge here? She spat. Freckledraft looked to his mentor, who shook his head. Even he didn't dare. The Psykana was supposed to be outside the normal chain of command. The mayor still lived, but he'd already abased himself to her presence. She knew he had no real influence in matters of true importance. Almost immediately after the fighting, Colonel Shaft had taken his pistol and attempted to blow his own brains out. Perhaps the shame was too much to bear, or he didn't want to see just how things could go worse. He'd seen the Evangelion up close and it was enough. Nothing else mattered. The history of humanity was over and done. Currently, the Colonel was being detained by his own men out of fear of insanity, so he wasn't exactly capable of stepping up to the plate. From the gathered group of troopers, someone was pushed out to the front. He ate dirt. Asuka looked on impassive as he got up and dusted himself off. You stupid bastards, he was muttering. Don't make us give you another victory throw into the air again, sir, one threatened in the anonymous safety of the multitude. Bastards! Asuka looked him over. He was young and had a proud posture. He lacked rank pips, but his eyes were empty of feeling. She recognised that stare. She'd seen it in the eyes of the two boys she claimed to love, and in her own in the mirror. What's your name, Krieger? She asked with a slight nod at his salute. Wilfred Ingram. He took a deep breath and reverted to his birth name. He was the little wolf by the stream, forced out from the shadow of the hunter that was his brother. Wolfenbach, Panzertrooper First Class, formerly of the Bond's 4th Division. Asuka raised an eyebrow. Von Wolfenbach? Not for a long time now, Kriegsmarine, he added stiffly. Asuka snorted, most unladylike. Well, maybe again. She looked around. Dust, debris, death. We've got a lot of work to do. Wolfenbach, you're now a lieutenant. We have the guns. Gather your men and whoever wants to volunteer. This area is clear, so send out people to find trucks and whatever will run. Make a list. Drill a bit. Eat. We assault the Cradle at noon. She paused. No, wait. Make that 3 o'clock. He saluted again. As you wish. For war and soil. She'd winced at that, then went away. The entire command structure for Germany had gone to pot. Perhaps enough of the government or rear echelon military officials survived in the far southern shelters, but not even they would dare oppose Surya at that point. She was Kaiser in all but open declaration. She now understood why Baka Shinji ran from open crowds. She stomped back to the bivouac to rest. When Mayumi offered to give her a massage, she didn't resist. Blessedly quickly, she fell asleep. Outside, shouts of "Krieg!" filled the air. The soul of Germany lived, but things wouldn't be the same again. The special 747 flight touched down at Kyoto Airport, and a nerve delegation had to travel in a limousine back to Hakone. It was easy to see where Japan ended and Tokyo 3 began. A pair of large AA towers straddled the highway heading southwest, and in the distance, sleek black stone walls closed off scenic valleys. Cannon routes dotted the hills and mountains. Past the road tunnel, the city itself unfolded like some demented game board, with its regular grid of city streets, pits and tips of strongpoint defences, and winding. It's good to be home again, Akari, Fiutsky muttered, while taking a deep breath of sterile recycled air. No matter what happens, it's still where we belong. Geno gave a slight snort. The attempt to kidnap them along the way was amateurish at best. Most of Seal's assets had already been drained away into Nerve Zone reserves. All inconsequential compared to the power of the Moon Cradle, but it was still insulting.
Nagisa's offer is moot, the old man added, so you will crush him.
Perhaps. It doesn't matter either way. Nagisa is also an amateur in the great game, and had already thrown away his opening. The rumble of the elevator stilled, and doors opened with a hiss. The hubbub of activity greeted them, the noise almost a physical blow. No longer did Nerve fill its corridors with just solemn emptiness and the distant, mysterious mechanical sounds. Employment, just as the city itself, bloomed under the passing of crisis. Danger pay was attractive pay, and Nerve could well afford it. A sizable portion came from the UN and other donations. But as the government over a semi-independent city, there was also taxes for the use of their land and their technologies. Nerve and Inhis, once adversaries, had all but married into mutual respect and useful partnership. Knowing each other over a bed of coals popped into Futsuki's mind. The energy of the city occasionally tired him out. He wondered if Gendo ever entertained thoughts of losing touch and being left behind. It should be his horror. Losing, not power, but the control that power could have provided. None of that showed in Gendo Akari's face, however. His confident stride was that of a returning conqueror. "Stop slacking off," he told Shigeru, who was there to welcome them back into command. "Get this base back to high alert and call Akagi and Katsuragi. We have important things to discuss." Ritsuko Akagi was enjoying her first uninterrupted stretch of sleep for the past week when the call arrived. Her body screamed at the shock to her biorhythms, but she was still delighted he'd returned. A part of her wanted to throw into his face all that he'd accomplished, without words shouting to the world, "Behold, the shadow of the Red Tower! I am not replaceable," while another simply wanted to feel what the elder Akari would do to confirm his controls. She yawned as she headed deeper into Nerve's lower levels towards her private laboratory. There were several documents she needed, proof for an incremental full disclosure that was really another layer of prepared lies. She ticked out in her head just what the world apparently knew about Nerve and the Evangelion. The public now knew that the Evangelions were created from a mixture of angel and human technologies. Nerve used to contain the Artificial Evolution Lab, where their advances did veer towards the ridiculous. Nerve still pulled new tech seemingly out of thin air, but at least it was a lot less ridiculous. For 15 years they would have had the world believe they had a monopoly on transcendental genius. Ridiculous. It was a brilliant enough achievement to puzzle out alien biologies. The official response was that the world had enough on its plate after impact, that being told their suffering was just the opening stage of an invasion would have crippled morale and essential restoration efforts. Jet alone and etc. proved that most of the world's governments and the military-industrial complex was in on the conspiracy. It was to keep idiots who'd want to try negotiating with the aliens from disrupting the preparations for the defence of the entire planet. Why are the angels attacking? They want Earth for some reason or another. Why Tokyo 3? The original angel carcass was there, used to build the Evangelions, and it served as something like a beacon to the angels. There was no reasoning with the angels, but it didn't possess an intelligence similar to mankind. They were the so far seen apex predators of the universe, and Earth just one more hunting ground. Apart from Gendo Akari's explanations, younger Akari also brought in knowledge that both muddled and supported the issue. The Psykers hinted that it might not have been the first time angels had come to Earth, and they were less driven off by those defenders at the time than the creatures eventually had their fill and left, or that they went off like scouts to call the rest of the pack. They were the source of the great, primordial monsters in mankind's collective unconscious. Ritsuko nodded. Palatable reasoning, especially if served with a good dose of mea culpa from those involved. All lies, of course. If Nagisa simply didn't project such an air of smug superiority, his truths would have been a lot more believable. The boy sought to change mankind, simply because he was incapable of handling mankind as it stood. Ritsuko yawned. If logic alone was enough to convince people, there'd be no need for leader figures. Her lab was a mess. Papers with half-remembered designs and equations were stacked high over desks and tables. A whiteboard was filled with more numbers and DNA strings leading up to two conclusions. A. Recursive stupidity, and B. Interesting but scary. A Tesla coil sparked on the wall, for ambience. Some enterprising geeks had figured out that by directing the frequencies it was possible to play music with lightning. She used it as an alarm clock. A large purple sofa with a rumpled blanket was to her left, and a discarded bra, not hers, upon it. Ritsuko yawned again as she passed the specimen displays. Liquid bubbled up in small preservation tanks and aquariums. One of the tanks was empty. Shit! Perhaps she'd grown far too complacent with how near everyone jumped to her authority. Was it spite or ego that led her to keep a living Angeli Anellid Mentis as a trophy? She'd stripped secrets from the evil little thing. A cure to its infestation would also help against senility and other neural degradations. The locks were undisturbed. Someone who could fake her thumbprint into the reader and input 6-digit code had stolen the most dangerous sample. Ritsuko reached for the phone, but saw a cut line. For security's sake, the lab had only one hardware information access point. Though it was 2015, cell phones were still cumbersome, thus Ritsuko didn't carry one around while indoors at Nerve. Maya! Who else would know her codes, or even the system override? She used the young woman as she herself had been used, but no. Ritsuko shook her head. It would be too redundant, for Lieutenant Ibuki already knew about almost as much as her about angel-spawn physiology. Nerve was a festering pit of lies and betrayals, however, so she could never really be so sure. The blonde scientist pulled out the papers she needed. The place had to be locked down. Psykana weren't allowed inside the geofront, so the mindworm could already be anywhere, or anyone, in Nerve. She grit her teeth as she opened to the door. None of the pilots, even Ayanami, were quite so immune to infestation. Oh yeah, fucking telepathy. The Cradle could order an assassination attempt to anyone from half a world away. The door opened with a hiss. She gasped. You? But why would... Ritsuko saw spots before her eyes. She let out a pained gurgle and doubled over, reeling from the blow to her solar plexus. As she lay there on the floor, she felt a cold, crawling sensation on the back of her neck. No! She yelled, trying to reach. Pain! Teeth tore out the flesh right underneath her skull, injecting acid onto bone, trying to bore right through. Her vision began to fade from the searing pain. Neurotoxin, she remembered, firing off all pain signals at once and making sure the prey can't move. She saw black shoes walk calmly away. Betrayals at Nerve, nothing unusual. She screamed. She was blind. It had already eaten into her vision centre. There was a numb feeling of bliss alongside the racking anguish she was feeling as her central nervous system began to give way. Apotoxin, was Ritsuko's final thought. She couldn't move to get at the thing at the back of her neck, but her spine was still working. Not for much longer. She had but a few precious seconds to reach into her lab coat pocket and grab at a thumb-sized hypodermic dispenser. She clutched at it, stabbing its point right into the flesh of her palm, and poison flowed directly into her bloodstream. And Ritsuko Akagi knew no more. The sliding door shished open, and Gendo Ikari came striding into the briefing room. He looked around at the guarded expressions waiting for him. He frowned. Akagi isn't here yet. She's tired, sir, Masato said carefully. I'm sure she'll be along. Maya's already gone off to look for her. Already there were Masato, Kaji, Futsuki, and Makoto. A command officer should not have to go off just to fetch another. That's why we have junior employees. Gendo gave a slight shrug and took his seat at the head of the table. Enough. We'll begin without her. The United Nations, prior to the Cradle's attack, had issued an ultimatum calling for greater oversight over our operations. He slapped down the manila folder he was carrying. This is the unofficial declaration of surrender of the United Nations of this world to whoever manages to take control over Tokyo Free. We are now, in effect, our own independent state. But as the UN does not have any idea of how many angels there will be, whoever controls the geofront can hold the world hostage. Contact between the angels and the thing they seek will begin third impact. Kaji blinked. But you control Tokyo Free, Commander. Shut up, Ryuji. Gendo and Futsuki said at the same time. UN oversight may be permitted, but not to interfere with the vital effort of actually defending the human race. No one else can do this job like we can. We have been forced into disclosure, but at least we now have the resources to do something about the situation. We contain deep within Geofront the angel known as Adam, which crashed on Earth billions of years ago. Certain parties and nations had already been aware of this. Relocating the carcass is not the lights abruptly turned red. The entire geofront rang with alerts. Misato stood up. "An angel attack!" Maya appeared on one of the raw monitors. "Emergency! Misato-senpai, it's bad! I'll be there as soon as I can. Are the pilots already at the gantries? Don't wait for my order. Attack the thing ASAP." There was no longer any need to watch out for unexpected enemy developments. It was best that they got over the little power displays quickly. "No, not that. This is a different emergency. Ritsuko-senpai's been attacked. We're in trouble here inside the geofront. Misato-senpai, please authorize a base lockdown." "What about Ritsuko?" "She's stable." Maya looked away. "It was very close, but she managed to survive. I don't want to talk about it on an open channel. We're at the infirmary." Gendo looked genuinely surprised. Akagi was too valuable and knew too much for any of the sides to strike at her directly. AV Unit 2 sat cross-legged as if meditating. The G-impact stake, also known as the Ernster Einschlag, was the last relic of Nerv's German branch. Technically, Germany had two sites, one on Berlin 2 and the other in Hamburg. The latter had even less defences than the primary site, and thus fell even quicker into ruin. Germany was the reason for Nerv's existence. Seal, as Gehren, had funded the Artificial Evolution Lab at Hakone and paved the way for its becoming Tokyo Free. They'd taken the most damage out of the human-angel conflict, partly as ironic misfortune and the results of complacency in expecting one little city out of all the world to absorb all the damage. The radioactive ruins were the reason other nations abruptly stopped trying to build even more Evangelions. In the words of the project manager at the Nerve Nevada site, "Unless you're ready to fortify up the wazoo and devote your entire economy to making sure Ava survives, then there's no point in trying." America's reserve seemed more than enough for the task. Then Nagisa ganked their newest Ava to turn humanity's last bolt hole into an engine of their destruction. 4 Evangelions. No will to build more. No time to do it anyway. Those 4 would have to defend the whole world. No more playing around with reserve pilot candidates. All or nothing. The pressure was immense. Large cables linked Unit 2's T modules to Unit 3's own, and to capacitor trucks on the ground. The Black Ava lay face up some distance away, as engineers refit its modular components for fire support tasks. Below gathered the forces ready to assault the Cradle. The 2 land raiders, one blue and one red, seemed to glare at each other. The Rudan pattern was slightly larger, but the Olympus pattern from Inhis had a stronger bite with its twin-link las cannons. Around them had gathered quite a motley crew. The Psykana had taken a savage beating, for even active battle precognition had its limits. Yang had ordered rapid deployment troops on a blind seaborne mission. The Chinese assets were the Admiral's Marines, of course. The delivery had focused on bringing essential vehicles and weapons over personnel, which was good news for the remaining troops. They were all organised into 10-man squads, each to a chimera. The newly arrived Psykana were dispersed, one to each squad, with their own assault squads led by the Sunshine Kid and Feckledraft. They tried to keep the old command chain intact, but it culminated with the Tokyo Free officers and Asuka Langley Soyu. The battle ahead, there'd be no room for fear or argument. If anyone had any doubts, it was best they remove themselves from the assembly or make their case to a power fist.
"Okay, I'm not good at speeches, so let's keep this short, okay? First of all, I want to thank you,"
Asuka said to the gathering.
"Thank you for hanging in there. Thank you for coming to help. This isn't about saving Germany. This isn't even for revenge. The situation hasn't changed. It's still about survival."
The civilians had gathered around Castle Sturmbrand while others searched for trucks. Some of the families decided to head further south anyway. The military couldn't spare many soldiers or vehicles for escorting duty. The convoy, once they got underway, would be practically defenceless. Their hope was that the assault upon the Cradle would distract the enemy to such an extent that the helpless populace would be left alone. Better yet, if somehow they could defeat the Cradle quickly.
It's not going to be easy. I'm not going to lie to you. The Cradle has around 30 to 60,000 people inside, and we don't know how many combat forms. Oh, sure, the Ava can smack around its defenders, but only from the outside. You're going to have to end it, to destroy their capacity to wage war from the inside. The whole lot of you will likely die."
She shrugged.
"Got a problem with that?"
"Therefore war," was the murmur across the gathered troops.
"Good! Then load up! We go to crack the Cradle!"
A joyous roar rose, and soon they were off. The Autobahn was still there and they could make good time. The Land Raiders and Lehman Russ fitted with dozer blades led the columns, ploughing aside ruined vehicles in the way. Chimeras and trucks followed, and tailing behind were even larger cargo carriers for the capacitors and Evangelion weapons. Flanking the troops on either side were the Evangelions, their mighty stride keeping pace with the motorized advance. Inside one of the trucks, Wilfred wondered if that was the new face of war. Around the shadows of Titans, people would fight in escalating savagery, like water boiling under pressure. The presence of such monstrous war machines didn't obsolete the fighting man, only forcing him to give light to the futility of fighting. He looked around. Besides, even the Ava required reserve power and weapon reloads. Nothing had changed. Man was still the best at killing man.
Everybody close your eyes!
Blasted through the radios. They did, even if they were going at full speed or safely inside armoured holes, remembering the ultimate command.
Follow Soryu, no matter what!
There was nearby heavy boom, the ground shook a bit, and then a ringing silence. A few heartbeats later, and they were allowed to ease up.
Holy, the bastards just tried to nuke us, didn't they?
Spat the soldier next to Wilfred. Outside, a brilliant white halo of clouds hovered above the highways. Angels didn't realise a nuclear explosion caused damage through different components. The AT field, as a region of absolute certainty, could only really do one thing at a time. Heat, pressure, and the radiation. Only a human mind with full knowledge of its own weapons could have crafted a shield to deflect or even reflect these effects. Creatures leapt out of hidden burrows, breaking into the defensive perimeter before anyone could react. Bolters and autocannons barked, flamers went to full. Some of the vehicles fell behind and were quickly overwhelmed. Not for a moment did the rest of the advance slow down. Looking from above, Mayumi was reminded of a pack of jackals after a herd of wildebeest. Only here, the jackals outnumbered their prey by 3-1.
Nothing's working,
Martin hissed.
Okay, stop. Just stop. Stop dying!
Unlike Kaoru, who could maintain a connection to the Cradle mind, but like the hybrid, liked asserting his independence from it. The necessity of controlling an AT field forced the separation. It was apparent enough that the Cradle mind was displeased, however.
Perhaps it would be best to conserve power and biomass. This is not delaying Soryu,
Sarah added softly. There was the undercurrent of, you do not comprise the entirety of the hive mind, Dr. Leder.
Fools! Nagisa has taken one of the angel cores. This cradle requires another to keep its integrity, so that both of you must share the output of a single core. The S2 engine is different from the core itself, but it is the latter that determines the rate of utilization.
A portion of his mind continued to lash out at the distance.
It is more than possible to overwhelm Soryu's own defensive capabilities.
Then why don't you just hit her with the same beam we used to attack the moon?
It is a poor tactician that leaves nothing in reserve. If she dodges it, or withstands it, then we are left dry, and we die. You must fight at close range, neutralize her field, and only then can we expect any attack to have a chance of success.
The shortened reach,
Sarah whispered.
The greatest number of stratagems is available where one possesses the advantage of terrain or resources.
But it's also written that it's better to fight at the enemy's home ground rather than in yours. Martin jabbed away.
The hive mind does you good,
Dr. Leder had to admit. There were benefits to Nagisa's ethos if one were just willing to pay the price.
But we have no more choice in this matter, so be silent and let your warborn drink of its fill. Your meatbag comments do not help quicken the process.
Though still monotonous, his voice turned ever more serious.
The time will arrive, worry not. You will walk as a new god.
Leder was a corruption of Adler, or Eagle. The scientist had never known his great-grandfather, but there were enough hints the man had been involved with rocketry. His grandparents had emigrated to the US afterwards, rearranging their name into something that sounded inoffensive. Leder sounded like some old-time cabinet. In all respects, they had lived quite sedate, normal lives as produce shopkeepers. His parents had fully absorbed themselves into the culture of rebellion. They were geeks before the word passed into lingo, nerds burning with raw physicality. His father worked on the programming of computers that were as yet half built, and his mother was a biochemist. They were freaks, and proud of it, and had many friends in many fields and walks of life. They rocked science and rocked it hard. He was a child of the 80s, riding technology out of control when lasers and giant robots tickled little boys' fantasies. Dr. Laders held the promise of the Cradle. The problem was, as Akagi has said, the fool was a transhumanist, the same way Misato was a teetotaler. In other words, the exact opposite. Nagisa might think he was paving the way for a better humanity, but Dr. Sean Vord Lader was a post-humanist. Humanity was a failed experiment, a dead end. Clean it up. Start over. Was it really fair to blame the Transformers for all of this? How could such blazing personalities as his parents produce such a darkly brilliant boy? It couldn't be just the name. Children were cruel, but no worse perhaps than being teased for having been named Jesus, or Elvis, or Frodo, or Abraham Lincoln II. After all, there was some guy out there named Trout Fishing in Nevada, and he'd chosen such a unique moniker for himself. A child, hiding in the bushes, trying to stop himself from crying, holding his breath and feeling his heart pound until it seems like it would burst right out of his chest. A young man, trying for an aloof bad boy persona that only predictably led him to being seen as a freakish loner, never having to hurt again. The flesh was weak and full of pain, moments of joy fleeting in the loneliness, and the ever greater dangers of knowing the folly and meaningless delights of other beings. He couldn't pretend to be sociable, to hide his sheer contempt for others. No one could hate him as much as he loathed himself and his flesh-bag weaknesses, so it seemed to balance out. The concept of suicide was puzzling, in how some opt to throw away their single and most precious existence for pains that others could endure daily without a second thought. Faith itself seemed meaningless, the horrors of religion were clear, while many an atheist or agnostic were tolerant and generous people in all other respects. His mind was his value, but was it worth throwing aside everything else? Had he been born in a different era, he would have been anything from a vizier, a wizard, a hermit, or most likely burned as a heretic. But he didn't hurt. Moral suicide was not yet a death. Yet many more lived through even worse travails, and led more open and successful lives. He didn't know what he was missing. How about Akagi? In many ways they were similar, but also not. People found her acerbic on occasion, true, but she was still respected if not well liked. Was it just because she was pretty? Because she could compromise her personal integrity enough to present such a fake facade for others' worthless little concerns? Lader didn't waste time with shame or excuses. He was no longer bound by instinct or the biofeedback from choices, chemicals to tell him if what he did was good or bad, held hostage by various invisible cues when dealing with other beings. He fractured his mind into 1,000 shards, and each into 1,000 more, and every single one devoted to finding more methods to cause pain, fear, and humiliation. Perhaps it was just so simple as that some people quite so enjoyed being an asshole. Nagisa had hurried to lever his controls into place, and just because obvious weak points were obvious, didn't mean they weren't worth using. Not even Nagisa desired perfect unity in the hive mind. Conflict kept life interesting. A deep pearl, a metal heart, that jagged flaw around which glory builds, and we all eat of our insanity, and we all drink of our insanity, and we cast it back into the sea. Dr. Lader had no more eyelids per se, but he blinked in confusion. Now why did he think that all of a sudden? Sarah Campbell was, of course, also part of the Cradle mind.
50,000 minds all joining together into a boundless gestalt. And what do I get? Bad poetry.
Tentacles!
Asuka screeched, aghast and disbelieving.
Ugh, enough of this crap! Get out of my way!
Her chain axe sang and bit into the thick, veiny protuberance blocking the road. She then used the momentum of that swing to turn about and throw the axe, a long chain extending from inside the handle. The roaring blades chopped into a few more strangling growths before wrapping around a tall tower shaped like a sea anemone. Its oral ring of tentacles seemed to function in the same way as Unit 3's extendable limbs, much to Yamagishi's displeasure. Unit 2 plugged the end of the chain axe into a socket on its bracer. The smell of ozone wafted through the air, and sparks danced along the links. The polyp tower let out a screech and writhed, and its tentacles whipped about in powerful frenzy. Asuka felt like vomiting, but she had experience on how that was a bad idea inside an entry plug full of LCL. Its toothed mouth at the tip was ringed with tentacles that throbbed. It was turning pink, screeching with pain, or anger, or likely... Below, inside the Nerve Mobile Control Center, Wilfred hissed at the screens. "It's not working." Other displays showed Army attempts to fight without getting in the way. "She's just feeding it more energy. It likes it." Dr. Thompson's eyeglasses glinted. "Wait for it." With the S2 engine, the capacitors that made Titanicus modules so bulky became redundant. Unit 2 carried only the chest plate and shoulder hood assembly that gave T-type Evangelions such a distinctive hunched appearance, and comparatively thin armor plates over its arms. The Reaver pattern of the Titan modules was one seamless shell around the chest and shoulders. It didn't have, or need, the powered assistance of full Titanicus gear, as much of that was simply to get the Ava moving under the strain of all the junk it'd have to carry into combat. A small window in Asuka's HUD showed capacitor banks draining. She kept pouring amperage through the chain. Soon enough the tower began screeching for a different reason, and its tentacular tendrils began exploding, and it collapsed into itself, a smoking, stinking heap. "Electrons are electrons in the end," the scientist from Nerve Boston remarked with relief. "Even creatures that can generate electricity can only store so much before their own cells start to cook from the energy running through." The Evangelion's capacitors were starting to refill from the trickle charge. The chain axe retracted back into its shaft, its blade stained with purplish ichor. Unit 2 looked at a distance, at the cradle looming large. Miasma clung to it like a wispy robe. Unit 3 kept the AT field barrier up, while blasting out now and then with its shoulder-mounted turbo-laser batteries. It carried more of the capacitor modules, in the more box-like warlord pattern of the Titanicus equipment. Its extendable arms and legs remained unburdened, however.
"Reload!"
Trucks hastened to obey. Unit 2 didn't need to carry the weight of so many capacitors just to support extended operations, so could devote that capacity instead to weapons. Asuka slid the great chain axe back into its slot and unslung the great bolter from its hooks on her backpack. She reached down to pick up a magazine from the ammo carrier, slid it in, and fired at the shadow of something approaching. Rocket rounds streaked through the distance and splashed harmlessly against the barrier of concentric red hexagons. There was a drawn-out BONG! And a blue flash, and Asuka felt something strike at her chest plate. Hard. Unit 2 fell over. A steady vip-vip-vip was the sound of Unit 3's fast-cycling laser cannons, keeping the enemy's defensive field up with suppressing fire. There was another loud BONG! But that attack was stopped by Unit 3's own AT field. Clearly, whatever attack the enemy was using, it was, like hers, interdependent of its own AT field or power supply. Unit 2's 4 eyes flashed and it slapped its right palm down at the ground. The shock, for some reason, made the fallen great bolter bounce, and the red Ava snatched it from the air. One-handed, it pointed the weapon up and let a stream of burning bolts rip at a distant shape in the air. Asuka rolled aside as corrosive balls impacted the ground where she lay. The acid dissolved through concrete and soil, down to the bedrock. Unit 2 stood up and let out an irritated growl. Standard Evangelion armour was composed of angled plates, with 1,000 layers of armour material. Titanicus armour added to the chest plate ceramic-infused titanium, diamond steel mesh, and ablative layers designed against directed energy attacks. Asuka could feel a burning sensation just below her left collarbone. A high-energy kinetic strike, that which the AT field was best at deflecting. But again, the AT field, for all its powers, could do only one thing at a time.
Damn! I was too focused on direct combat again!
The Evangelion had a mind of its own, and didn't think the same way as human beings, or any other animal on the planet. The square cube law would have meant not even the Ava could support its own weight, much less perform such feats of strength, but like all angels seemed to exist within its own bubble of altered space-time. Even down to its cells, down to the very last atom, it was never really part of the universe at all. It was a historical fact that sometimes in the heat of battle, even the berserker could find a certain serenity, where every motion flows seamlessly into the next, and time itself seems to lose all meaning. To Asuka, all that meant was that her senses could expand to extraordinary levels. There was this feeling of omniscience, as if the world itself turned so slowly, and she could see things almost before they happened. This battle reflex mode could only come when the AT field was directed inwards, rather than wasted on showy displays. Ritsuko Akagi could have told her she was eroding her own personal AT field, and all the dangers that implied, but Asuka thought it was just a normal extension of battle rage.
Target switch! Yamagishi, take the air. I'll handle that idiot with the railgun. Everyone else, the Cradle! We destroy that, and this is over! Charge!
Unit 2 roared and began running. Fighting against the carry and Ayanami forced her to create and discard tactics and techniques on the fly. Even the power of the S2 engine could be defeated with proper tactics or sheer willpower. After all, they defeated angels with their own S2 organs before. It was as if they were meant to battle each other, in their own special time and frame of mind. That's where they lived. People always thought it was knowing each other's strengths and limits so perfectly that the best they could hope for was a stalemate. Idiots. Who was this now that dared to challenge her? She stood against a new pantheon, the Titans, the beginning of a new age born of blood and sinew. A blue flash and a metallic sound following close behind. The air around the red Evangelion seemed to explode outwards, her every step leaving deep craters. She could see it, like ripples on water, the approaching hypervelocity slugs. So slow. Her great bolter barked once, twice, and slower bolt rounds left orange trails through the distance. Once again, where hypersonic object met hypersonic object, both would just liquefy, but explosively so. Unit 2 passed through the obscuring cloud and beheld her enemy. The jagged wolf still had that long saurian back, but now had a more wolf-like face with fangs. Barbed quills still protruded from the back of its skull. On its back it carried twin rail launchers, massively more powerful than any Evangelion portable weapon. The slugs were infused with psychic energy to simply ignore AT fields. Asuka felt her vision go bright for a moment, pain consuming her mind, and she stumbled. Unit 2 face-planted into the dirt, narrowly avoiding getting its face sheared off by a heavy particle stream. Godzilla, the jagged wolf, was not, but that was a melter. This was always the price for power. Asuka knew that well. Run fast enough, see too much, and there was always a wall waiting. She dropped the bolter and unslung her chain axe, and threw it again. It spun like a boomerang, and shredded the long launchers on the Warborn's back. It returned to her outstretched hand.
Where is he?
Asuka demanded through the open link.
Make him come out! I want to hear his excuses before I kick his teeth in! He will explain himself to me!
Martin smirked. Nagisa is somewhere else. Do not overestimate your importance to him, Soyu, based on the possession of a pair of teats. The jagged wolf's corpse-white shell began to twist and reform, tilting its torso back to a more humanoid stance. Its wolf's head with 6 blazing orange eyes opened its jaws, exposing rows of vorpal teeth. Its shoulder blades moved back, and its arms lengthened and thickened, serrated claws flicking out at the tips of its fingers. It howled. The trident Warborn, jagged wolf werewolf. Why that shape? The double-jointed limbs made it fast, leaps and bursts of speed greater than the Evangelion. It was strong. The human shape wasn't perfect. Among the predatory animals it lacked in speed or strength, or even sharp bodily implements. Wham! Asuka managed to turn the axe just in time. The oversized axe head also served as an effective shield. Her Ava had to bend backwards, its feet digging deep furrows into the ground. Its spine strained from the weight of the enemy. Unit 2 had muscles, but not quite as thick or many. Claws dug into metal and pulled the weapon free from her hands. Jaws that could bite through her torso snapped at her head. Unit 2's Titan modules completely lacked onboard weapons. Asuka let go, dived down, grabbed the enemy by the waist, and slammed it to the ground in a textbook German suplex. Its head cratered a section of the Autobahn. A single lane away, tanks and troops hurried past, while the enemy was so dazed. Martin struggled in her grip. Asuka pitched over to the side and took some fighting room. Their AT fields meshed and neutralised each other. The jagged wolf bared its teeth again. Unit 2 reached back and pulled free its hammer. A cartridge locked into place. An axe age, a sword age, a fire age, a knuckle age. All this and more would come to pass.
On his damn fool head!
She screamed and leapt, meeting him in mid-air. Hear the cradle, my friend, my friend. Life is no curse, nor death the reward. To the vistas we have yet to explore, bend no more to a depth never yours. Mayumi Yamagishi had her own problems. Her nemesis Sarah Campbell too had her own problems, mentally at least. With bored ease, she twisted her trident warborn away from another laser volley. Laser pulses might travel at the speed of light, but Unit 3's shoulder-mounted turbo laser cannons had a very limited vertical traverse. Flight was such a wonder. Mankind had never really conquered the void. They might try, with their machines, with their world records, but at the end they were all still souls, trapped in the well of gravity. They flung themselves into the expanse, and always they fell. Back into the grime, the crowded plain, the prison of two cardinal dimensions. How could they bear it? They were all so limited, so blind, unable to see the big picture, again and again repeating the same old mistakes. She thought back to that little cell in Johannesburg. The sky was her only release. The steel-barred windows were too high for her to see anything, but she could hear the hints of being in a city. And it didn't matter. She could scream, she could cry, she could die. No one would care. People were meat. Her father was meat, her mother was meat, she was meat, her captors were meat, meat that hurts, that has urges, that suffers and dies. The soul was just a comforting illusion. Except that the soul did exist, but that provided no comfort at all. It was better as a delusion. The Flanagan Institute, formerly a competing organisation to the Marduk Institute, but actually just another of the 600 semi-legitimate fronts, had finally tracked her down in early 2011. She had paused, just before stepping into that black car and leaving her old life forever, and looked up at the blueness of the sky. She reached up, relishing the emptiness between her hand and the expanse. But of course no one can ever really own the sky. She was just trading prisons. She was still paying with her flesh for a right to exist. For a moment her chest tightened. Her parents were good people, but also each independently wealthy. When Impact removed the worth of those little plastic cards they carried, they had little actual skills to fall back upon. They had to start over from scratch, in a continent they didn't know. For a time, others could pay the price for her existence. They had suffered, they had faltered, and now they were done. Look to the cradle, my son, where all is still and safe and warm, the place that death cannot touch, the future drinks from its wellspring. They called it the hive mind, but the stupid mundanes, they had no idea. The brilliance of a diamond was in its many facets, each distinct but adding to the whole. The body was just flesh, cursed meat, but her mind, her very soul, with the fractal unity she felt complete. Free! It was like flying. She watched the battles below, again easing away from more anti-air efforts. Splitting her attention was easy. Martin. He and her, they were linked. It wasn't love. Not quite. But even loathing meant caring about someone else's well-being. He raged at being regarded as second best. One would have to be a fool to trust Kao Nagisa, but he has always been brutally honest. Perhaps even maliciously honest. You are nothing. A pale copy, a hopeless redundancy. Understand this. Soryu was anointed, and though you might share the same blood, until you seize the mantle from her hands you might as well not exist. She was chosen, you were not. But the truly strong choose for themselves. At least Nagisa had ambition. A new culture, a new world coruscating in the long night. To gain all, you must risk it all. Sarah didn't understand why Nagisa seemed so frightened of Ikari, other than a tendency for grandstanding, which Nagisa himself was also wont to do. The younger Ikari was a disgustingly normal teenager. Martin Arthur Bettelheim raged and clawed and howled. Asuka Langley Soryu hated and stabbed and roared. Both were in the grip of the Berserker gang. Too similar to each other, neither can live while the other survived. She felt cold. She had no actual desire to replace the Evangelion pilots in the limelight, but until they were destroyed, she could never truly be free. Take the cradle, my child, and leave behind the hate and the lies. Peer into that vessel where you wait, and taste at last the fruit of eternity. Her warborn landed smoothly behind the black Evangelion. Her wings folded up behind her arms. Iridescent patterns glistened upon the black skin of her war machine. It wasn't a bland, uniform black like that of the Ava. It wasn't paint, but rather overlapping scales and spines. Its legs were double-jointed and ending in curved talons. Its face was skull-like, even slightly bat-like, but a flattened frill lay around its neck. The original Trident project was based off the Evangelion, but with a distinctly Saurian influence. From what they seized at the moon's cradle, they had sculpted its shape a bit farther up the evolutionary tree. Now the Warborns didn't quite suck as much in close combat.
You are Mayumi Yamagishi. Even you are a pale shadow. I would pity you, but you deserve much more than that.
Mayumi huffed, feeling the heat on her back. The lasers had actually tagged the enemy a few times, but Warborn armour had the same layer of ablatives as Titanicus armour. A greater limitation in mere capacitor drain was heatsink capacity. That was why the Cradle preferred kinetic impactors over energy lances.
I won't listen to your lies,
she said with as much defiance as she could muster. Sections on her back armour blew, flinging hot heatsinks at the enemy. At the same moment, she scrambled forward to give herself some breathing room. Sarah nonchalantly slapped away the steaming bricks with a flap of her black rings.
Then I won't lie to you. You've been lied to long enough.
And sadly it was quite true. It was interesting that her Phoenix Spasm Lamia had almost the same face as Unit 3. Martin had always been about fire and action, but her strength was taking the power of others into herself. Her passive acceptance even intimidated him. Just because her flesh was his for the taking at any moment didn't make him forget the danger under those soft, yielding curves. For all his talk of beating Soryu, bloodying a Golden Saint, or even going up against the person Nagisa himself so carefully prepared, he could never go from zero to balls to the wall like she could. The Feathered Serpent was the original ambush predator that the insignificant little ancestors of wild cats so feared. Her lazy evasions from earlier had lulled her prey into a relaxed illusion. And then, faster than an eye blink, there was only screaming. She felt no guilt, though Nosferatu meant plague bearer. What she gave was a gift. They ran like rats, and found there was little shame in it. The contemptuous ease by which the Cradle had brushed aside whole armies, it was nothing compared to the war insult that was the Evangelion's existence. Wilfred grit his teeth as the command truck went on at full speed. Though they were far enough the Avers could no longer be seen, little earthquakes followed to remind them of the titanic struggle. The Evangelion was terrible enough, and the sheer size of Castle Sturmbrand was maddening. But the Cradle, at 6 kilometres all around, it was an unearthly monolith. The Evangelions reminded them how so very small and futile mortal efforts were. But they were supposed to fight that? Soryu was just a goddamn distraction. Even one such as he, who had thrown away his hopes and his fears, couldn't so blithely accept such an impudent act. Can we really do this alone? You have some sort of weapon or breaching charge to break open the shell, right? The command truck held mostly those from Nerve, Dr. Thompson supervising, along with Lama Feckledraft to coordinate where mundane methods failed. The young scientist looked up, his face ashen. No, we don't. He was utterly out of his depth. It was clear, however, that theirs was a one-way road. Wilfred had to laugh. If surprise really was the key to success, then this has to be the best plan ever.
We have been preparing for this moment for nearly 4,000 years, Lama Feckledraft mentioned, staring at the space between his splayed fingers.
Wilfred hung on as the truck lurched on a piece of broken road. Really?
Well, not like this, but a similar situation. The ancients had always believed that the world not only would end, but must end. It is a battle that is reflected in the conflict between gods and giants, those who choose this world and those who would destroy it.
So have you prepared? Dug up any old tricks to deal with something as big and powerful as the Cradle, if all of this happened before?
The ancient instructions can be summed up as thus. Stop them until they give up.
Wilfred laughed until his stomach hurt. Wise words. Very wise. Sometimes the simplest solutions were the best. The old monk did not look amused.
Damn it! Yamagishi!
Asuka noticed 2 flailing black forms at the edge of her vision. She didn't have time to spare. Bam! Her warhammer caught the jagged wolf at the side of its head. The werewolf-shaped Angel Ava hybrid toppled. It was starting to severely piss off its pilot. A warhammer was supposed to be a cumbersome weapon. In close quarters combat, her S2 engine advantage meant little. The muscles of his warborn was arranged far more efficiently than her human-shaped Ava. He had the edge in speed and strength, and still he was getting kicked around. Damn it. What is it that I'm still missing? It was impossible, and since the AT field was naturally opposed to psychic phenomena, he was certain she wasn't altering probability somehow. What did she have that he still lacked? Conviction? No. He roared and impelled her through the less armoured abdomen with his claws. He was even more determined to be the best. He was throwing everything into the fight. His Warborn was different from her Ava. It felt no pain. It did not hesitate. The control system was wired directly into his cortex. No crap about sync ratios and like that there. I can't lose! Martin shouted hoarsely. Not to you. I am you. Distilled. Amplified. The jagged wolf-like harness opened its maw to bite, but Unit 2 managed to wedge its hammer into the jaws. Amber light began to glow from inside its throat. At such range, the field couldn't be used as a barrier. Asuka grimaced, red staining the orange LCL around her mouth. She pushed up with her right hand while the left yanked at something. Martin had a moment to think, uh-oh, realising it was a chain. The chain axe head purred as it was pulled back to its shaft. Unit 2 slashed away at the side of the Warborn's neck, and the charged particle bottle lost containment. A scorching glow stream spurted out from the wound. She chopped away some more, and at the pained roar pulled her Einschlag out from the enemy's jaws, then introduced it again into its head. The Warborn werewolf slammed into the ground. Asuka pounded at it 3 more times, denting its brain case into a crater.
You're me? Ha! Where does that moronic drivel even begin to make sense?
Asuka scowled as she saw the skull pop back up. Just what did it take to put these things down permanently? It was regenerating colossal damage way faster than Ava.
You have no idea what you're dealing with, do you?
It could use the AT field. That meant it had a core. All she had to do now was find it, pull it out and break it. Purplish e-core dribbled out from the stab holes in her gut. Her own plug suit was torn in the same spot, though thankfully the flesh underneath only showed deep bruises. Evangelion battles tended not to last more than a few minutes, up to half an hour. Even when the records showed hours of engagement, most of that is simply just watching and waiting for the enemy. Combat, in itself, was rapid and brutal, and final. That was how she gained her S2 engine after all. The problem was that the enemy's build was even more optimised towards rip and tear than her own war machine. It was also a wonder that rip and tear was likewise ineffectual against her. It was intense. Poison filled her veins with fire, but there was also this blissful, soothing sensation as lifeblood drained out of her neck. Mayumi shivered. Absently she realised she'd let go of the controls and where her hands were. For a moment Mayumi had a vision of Asuka standing with her back turned. The red-haired girl was in her plug suit. "Tch! Weak!" she spat and began to walk away. Mayumi was a loner and didn't go into many encounters where she could feel rejected. Like Asuka, her defining moment of being unwanted was to be abandoned by her mother. A prog knife deployed out from a shoulder pylon. Unit 3 grabbed it with its left hand and stabbed at its own face. Stab! 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 The fanged, cobra-hooded head clamped onto her neck didn't seem to mind. It only let go when it was starting to lose more fluid than it was taking. Taloned feet pushed off Unit 3's shoulders and it vaulted back to the sky. The Lamia landed a short distance away, crouching, still as a gargoyle. The Black Ava wreathed unsteadily on its feet. A portion of the Titan modules around its right shoulder had been torn clean off to open the way to its neck. Too dangerously close to the entry plug. Mayumi's vision was still fuzzy. She heard a nearby clanging noise. Then she realised she was hearing it, not the Ava. Whatever it was, the thing making the noise was just outside her entry plug. Impossible! The sheer size of the Ava meant its LCL/coolant vessels must also be broad enough for the flow. Something was in her veins, clogging up arteries and pushing through her very innards. She could feel it. And the violation was literally as bad as it could be without bumping genitalia. Do you really think Soyu cares? If you sacrificed anything for her sake, it would make her treasure your existence, Sarah whispered. She chuckled darkly, but not unkindly. Do you think that by suffering you can buy your way into her success? She flicked at her own glossy black page boy haircut. The Warborn Lamia licked at its bloodied claws. If you choose to live as a tool, then you must accept the fact that tools exist to be used. To be broken. Its arms extended, whip-like, and its grip cut into Unit 3's shoulders. It pulled, dragging the Ava into the ground. Mayumi screamed in pain as shockwaves rippled through her Ava. Shockwaves reverberated within its armoured torso, tearing apart organs and blowing out armour.
And discarded.
Serpentine arms retracted back into shape. Sarah Campbell sighed and closed her eyes.
We are too similar, Yamagishi, and for that you will have my pity.
It went completely as Kaoru had predicted. There was a good reason Evangelion battles happened in bursts of furious activity. The power of the S2 engine may give endurance to an Ava, but its fighting ability was ultimately limited by the pilot. Unit 2 reeled and tried to strike back. Its punch fell wide, and a blow to its midsection lifted it clear off the ground. It staggered back and collapsed, face up. The sky was so blue, and the light seemed to swallow its consciousness. Asuka grasped for breath. Even with the hyper-oxygenated and nutrient-laden LCL, the pilots would exhaust their own body's fuel reserves. Mental fatigue would scar them much sooner. The pilots were still human beings, and with all that implied. The random hand of fate as expressed by genetics and natural selection had its limits. Asuka kicked out and felt a slashing pain up her shins. She looked left, then right. The Warborns, claws and talons and cannons integrated into their bodies meant they would never be disarmed. She decided to go for the chain axe. Without looking, she dodged a volley of spines. A prog knife popped out from a shoulder pylon, and also without looking, she threw that behind her. She was rewarded with a pained howl as the knife entered one of the werewolf's 6 eyes. She was still fighting well. But it was inevitable. She would falter. As she scooped down to grab at her weapon, a black tendril wrapped around her left ankle. Unit 2 slammed into the ground, shoulder first. She felt her own get wrenched out of its socket. She would wither.
Can't move, you useless doll! Move!
The red Ava's fingers twitched. Ah! The multi-thousand-ton mass of a warborn slammed into her chest. Her chest caved inwards. Her heart stopped. The glow faded from Unit 2's eyes. And she would die. Martin was likewise out of breath. Unlike the Ava, the Trident didn't use LCL, as both as contact and buffering medium. It was surprising how so normal the cockpit looked, with its main screen and assortment of buttons, levers and switches. Interface between the Trident and its pilot was through data jacks implanted directly into the pilot's skull, just behind the ear. They had telepathy and also TCP/IP. The mind was a matrix of personalities and their works. The worm around his spine worked its wonders. It automatically adjusted chemical imbalances in his bloodstream, absorbed excess feedback, and repaired whatever damage it could find. Soryu could only endure. He would regenerate. The werewolf grabbed the Ava's head and slammed it back into the ground. No response. Martin grinned. I am better than you, Soryu. The power of the Eva is limited by its pilot. Now you break! Claws scratched almost lovingly at the red face armour, then dug into the seam around the chestplate joint. With a grunt, Martin ripped off the Titan module. Break, damn you! He laughed maniacally as he got a good grip on the Ava's chest armour, the last barrier to its core.
I'll kill you! Kill you all!
Those screams were broken by sobs. Unit 3 was pinned down, the Lamia's limbs wrapped around it like packing tape.
We are deathless, interloper,
Sarah whispered, the forked tongue of her warborn licking at Unit 3's face. Bit by bit it was dissolving the faceplate.
Punish the imperfect flesh, for only through permanence can there be triumph.
The Lamia could have injected poison or acid to have the Ava melt from the inside, but the Evangelion was a war machine of rarity and utility. Mayumi was crying, then screamed again as convulsions racked her body. She struggled, but there was no way to get free. The crushing embrace of a serpent didn't come from muscle power, but removing leverage from its prey. That was a fatal limitation of muscles linked to swinging bones and joints. It was the very reason her own Unit 3 was supposed to be undefeatable in close combat, even by the general purpose Unit 2. No one among the planners could have predicted the enemy would assimilate its abilities so quickly. The Angels weren't that smart, and apparently neither was Nerve. Their uninterrupted string of victories had made them arrogant in their own abilities. Asuka Langley saw you so personified that glory of war, the part that knew honour, discipline, perseverance and mercy, an Athena ascendant, not the bullying Ares that fled upon being wounded. They'd known each other for but a few hours, but the girls found an easy familiarity. Perhaps it was that, to Asuka, Mayumi looked very much like a younger Ritsuko Akagi. They both had that little mole near the lips, and hid fear of intimacy behind a shield of disinterest. The intellect in being able to talk shop with Evangelion combat was also refreshing. Being a respected senpai relaxed the stress of competition.
It can't end like this,
she half begged. Her vision was starting to dim. If even Soryu had fallen, what could she accomplish? The wrenching noise of Unit 2's chest armour being pulled off seemed to fill the plug. The werewolf began bashing away at the exposed core. Every strike seemed to physically slam into Mayumi. She grit her teeth until her gums bled. She gripped the controls of her Ava so tightly the titanium began to bend. A red light and a bloody haze started to fill her being, starting from her womb. Wilfred Ingram Wolfenbach, lieutenant for a fresh few hours, punched out a small locker inside the command truck. As a bog soldier, he'd been at the edge of death so many times, but never had he actually felt so helpless. The assault groups had already begun their siege and infiltration of the Cradle. While nerve technicians tried to resuscitate Soryu, other screens showed the troops in open battle against the Cradle's last line of ground defences. If the enemy brought back their trident warborns, then their gambit would just fall apart.
Don't worry too much,
Fickledraft murmured, staring at the two land raiders blasting through the impediments in the way.
The girls are stronger than you may think. We have to honour their pains in giving us this one chance.
Even so, the power of the Evangelion doesn't seem up to it. Wilfred had learned that the primary breaching method would have been to ram Castle Sturmbrand itself into the Cradle. If only we had more firepower on hand. The Tibetan monk.
What is the finest weapon of man? These god machines we call Evangelions? The Legio Terminatus? The Adeptus Psykana? The tank? The las cannon? The fist?
He shook his head and pointed at the screen.
None of those things. Courage and courage alone stands above all. You know this already, but there are others who have eaten of the same lesson.
There was a bright red flash and a screech of pain. The coiled grip loosened a fraction. What? Who dares? Bright lance cannon beams poked holes into Lamia's back. A wing of Tempest gunships rolls out of tree-line concealment in a strafing run. Mayumi winced as one of the las bolts burned through the enemy's arms and into her thigh. Missiles fired and exploded against the red barrier of an AT field. The wing of 8 VTOLs broke off into 2 groups to circle around the Trident warborns.
Worthless insects!
Martin yelled, throwing spines at the flyers. The Lamia, still wrapped around Unit 3, used the Ava as a shield. The gunships couldn't fire their las cannons without poking holes through the captured Ava. Finally, one of the VTOLs dared to go into a dive. Close range meant better accuracy. The werewolf speared it with a spine from its back. Another Tempest had already taken the same line of attack. That one kept firing all through the dive, and rammed itself into the Lamia's face. Promethean flames clung to the warborn. A blade snapped out, switchblade style, from Unit 3's bracer. Screaming as well, she punched up, through the Lamia's jaw and into its nasal cavity. The Ava then pushed away, throwing obscuring orange smoke and hot chaff all around. Unlike normal people, the Cradle-enhanced pilots could segment their attentions.
Interesting,
Sarah thought with some amusement.
Using our very own trick with the miasma, but here in close combat it will buy no more than a few seconds.
The point was not to hide Unit 3 from view, however. For a moment, losing sight of the Ava meant the enemy had to consider looking for it. Its threat level increased, it grabbed attention, and for those crucial seconds, the enemy forgot about that which they had broken utterly. Fingers dug into the side of the werewolves and pulled it down to face level. The red Ava showed open-toothed grin and exhaled a misty cloud. Somehow that was far more threatening than any mere roar. Martin slashed with its long claws, but the Ava nonchalantly grabbed the wrist and twisted. Then, holding 2 portions of the warborn's anatomy as hammer and anvil, it began beating the werewolf's face in with its own elbow joint. Disappointed at the lack of blood and carnage, it pulled the enemy into an over-the-shoulder throw. And then it roared. Titan modules blew off from their mountains as useless rate. Its red core glowed and bled purple blood around the sphere. A little girl was crying.
I'm not weak. Not useless, damn it. I'm gonna smash you all.
She clutched at her doll while it rained outside. Thunder and lightning broke out at the distance. She curled up into a ball.
Don't need anyone. I'm fine alone, but...
She hugged her doll tighter, and two faces flashed across her memory.
Don't want to be alone.
She felt warmth around her shoulders. Shh, my little treasure. It's going to be all right. I'm here now.
Mama?
The Earth's Cradle monitored the situation in much the same way Nerve Command kept track of its Evangelions. Dr. Lader split his attention between the site defense, packing away the elements for evacuation, and the Trident.
Get up, you pathetic cur!
He hissed to Martin Arthur Bettelheim. The teenager was stunned, and not just from the broken neck of his warborn. What? She can't regenerate, can she? What does it take to actually kill this bitch?
The Evangelion has gone berserker! The core is exposed! This is your chance! Both of you attack now!
Panic tinged his words. He needed help at home, and quickly. Emergency! Ran through the Cradle mind. There is an armoured fighting vehicle identified as a Land Raider rampaging through our central hangar.
What? Impossible! We have an active AT field to block all teleportation attempts. It would take either a mind equal to mine, or a tactical Yeah!
Bang! One of the larger bulkheads fell open, its joints blasted off and thunder hammers to task. Facing them were a host of mutants, battlesuits, and men and women determined to fight for the children they'd brought into the Cradle. They stood at a standoff, both sides unwilling to make the first move. There was a steady tap, tap, tap of a wooden cane upon the shell-tiled floor. An old man, tiny and hunched over with the years and garbed in an orange robe, squeezed to the front. He took one last drag of his cigar and put out the embers against the knee plate of a nearby Heraclitus.
4,000 years waiting is this, but still not a battle to fight, I wish. Surrender! Protect its own people, the Psykana will. Beg of you, I do. Do not slave yourself to this beast.
You were just enslaved for your own purposes instead, yelled one of the controllers there. Fresh new mutation forms from the vats and augmetic warriors to lead them. They were the force meant to attack Tokyo 3. They were made for tunnel fighting and the confusion of psycho combat. No, you worthless fossils, clinging to a duty long since obsolete. We are finally free from the chains of man and mortality. We will have freedom, or we will have your death.
You surrender, meat puppets!
Voices echoed and combined, the walls themselves vibrating to provide.
You are intruders here, and your deaths are a waste to the greater good!
Curly Krishna, the Sunshine Kid, closed his eyes and sagged upon his walking sticks. He had lived through the centuries, and had seen the atrocities man could commit. He had fought in battlefields long forgotten, and the memories of all the masters of Javal before him, and all those that came before the mountains were tamed. Never had he faced so tragic a decision. The core of the Buddhist philosophy was not to kill. The necessity of the Psykana and the fighting tradition of Javal meant they had to absorb the sin for the rest of their people, to sacrifice even nirvana for the sake of those who still lived in the mortal illusion. The greater good was an aggregate of many of the more noble practices of many religions. It was quite a rationalist view if one just ignored the mind control, the mutations, and chronic backstabbing. From the four great truths of Buddhism, the gradual self-improvement and the setting aside of fallacious individualism. And that was what managed to piss off even the enlightened. Form without substance, action without purpose. It was an empty life, and a gross parody, an insult to everything that they valued. Javal, to live is to suffer. The Cradle, through pain there is strength. Javal, all stories end, even the heroes must rest. The Cradle, then let us be villains instead. Age and weather had eroded whatever traits he had that would hint at whatever part of the world he was born or the culture that caused him to wander. Javal was isolationist, but ever had its ruling council been veterans of every sort of warfare possible. He was the oldest, and still remembered the Spanish tercio. In his youth he plucked arquebus balls out of the air and wrestled with living gods in the Congo. The Nile was no mystery to him, and there he found the elder diadem. He frowned. He had lived for too long. Happy memories. They stung more than the sad events. Why didn't it happen earlier? He could have done so much more when he was younger. He had watched humanity go from atrocity to atrocity, and by his oath was forbidden to interfere. A bittersweet gift for an old man. The Sunshine Kid twisted his walking stick and pulled free a hollow section. There was a snap hiss, and a glowing green rod of energy formed out of the hollow tip. Everyone boggled. No way! Is that a... The old monk flipped the remains of his walking stick, and the central piece fell off. A similar hollow tube was in his left hand, and with a slight flick, another glowing green rod appeared. 2 of them! Names held power. Why was it that 2 or more centuries later, a wizened old monk was still called the Sunshine Kid? That little old man holding 2 sticks of coherent light paralysed the defenders with fright, far more than the sight of a row of grim armoured hulks. Then he started moving. It was this little bright blur headed right for your face, like sunrise through the mountains, and a warm light that was for many the last thing they would ever see. Jonathan Fresh woke up in one of the containment facilities deep within the Cradle. He was naked and felt slimy. The Cradle had no need for torture or interrogation. They leached the information they needed right out from his neural pathways. What was a teleport homer? The new dictionary definition was a device or other object that emits a unique presence detectable to extrasensory perception to facilitate transition between 2 discrete points instantaneously and without loss. Telepathy was a quantum process, and psychic power was the manipulation of probability in a macrospatial quantity. The usual method of setting up a teleport homer was to leave some object or mind with an easily detectable psychic signature. The Cradle handled this easily enough. They could, with such a vast mind, overwhelm normal teleportation measures with either its own presence or an AT field, while simultaneously able to set up teleport homers with a more subtle presence. Fresh wasn't a psyker. He could, however, pray. The soul couldn't be blocked, and it went deeper into the communal vessel of humanity than just the collective unconsciousness. A golden saint could then alter probability from elsewhere to bring a blind teleport right to where they needed to be. The Cradle sought to unite humanity into a communal mind. However, humanity was already one organism, stretching through space and time, past and future. They were the 15th angel, a creation in seeking to preserve itself from being devoured by Lilith, the primordial source. Yang Wen Li wouldn't have been such a successful strategist if he wasn't curious about the newest developments in tactics or politics. The UN saw great threat in Shinji Akagi, but only so far as that he possessed an Ava and had somehow managed to convince secret societies to reveal themselves despite thousands of years of careful isolation. That might be a mass brainwashing power, just as dangerous and disturbing as the Cradle's own. Yang, living in Tokyo 3, saw open reverence by at least 2 different groups of societies, with Eastern and Western modes of thought, and in the cloaks of faith Buddhist and Catholic. Simple persuasion, or even forceful mind control, wouldn't have been enough to pull together such distinct and even rivaling creeds. Coercion would have meant the boy had to either rewrite their brains to such precision they'd obey, without removing their abilities, or maintain constant pressure upon their senses. Impossible. Even if Yang didn't quite believe the boy wasn't a psychic, it was quite clear that psychic activity interfered with activation of the Ava. Direct manipulation on such a scale would be godlike, and it was also clear the boy preferred the power of his machine god. Why do they trust the boy? Yang was curious. What leverage does he have to make them obey? What can he give that is worth the destruction of their own societies and the mass death of their own people? A soldier doesn't kill just because of orders. Man wasn't an automaton, nor armies homogeneous fighting groups. Every person had a lever, a motivation for doing. What makes a person get up in the morning? What could make him go without sleep? Some people work for pay. Others see pay as a convenience to allow them to purchase and follow other pursuits. Not for money alone would criminals rob, but to what these money represented, what it could give them. Even Yang didn't call for his people to fight out of sheer patriotism, though they likely would see it that way, but because to be a patriot for Yang's China was to live and succeed in the new century. Eventually it would become recursive, and the distinction between reward and motivation blurred. Given the absolute clusterfuck that the UN Psykana was subject to, Yang couldn't find any handle. Psykers hated the boy, true, but not the most powerful and active groups. They willingly endured in his name. Such unselfishness was unreal. No, not really. Even fresh in faraway Europe could see it. Yang's letter didn't come as much of a surprise, but it was a pleasant one. If Yang had figured it out, his own concerns were likely as true. It was a personality cult. Dangerous. Dangerous. Alexander, Napoleon, Hitler, but also Gautama, Yeshua ben Yusuf, and Muhammad. Communism knew the power, denied it, and eventually had to accept that they could not truly defeat it. It was an ironic truth. Religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people, was the actual quote from Marx. Faith was apparently illogical, but a powerful and deeply entrenched force. What a man wouldn't sacrifice for his family, for his country he would for his God. Even more dangerous. Mahayana Buddhism did not precisely have an end times, but Christianity did. It wasn't complete heresy if they were to say, though no one can truly know when the end times will arrive, but the sheer coincidences piling up and Nagisa's blatant references to it, he's trying to artificially bring it about and thus we refuse it. When it's time, but for now we fight. Was it possible to make a saint out of someone who didn't quite share one's own religious beliefs? The boy was no prophet, but a defender of the law. By his own Shinto definitions, the boy should have been emperor yesterday. From abroad, only Yang, who among all the billion people of his country was deemed worthy to possess the mandate of heaven, could grant it to someone else. God helped those who helped themselves, but he also worked in mysterious ways. And now, apparently, the vehicle of that deliverance was a frustrated young teen. Nagisa was an active precognitive. That was what made him so terrifying as an adversary to plan against. Hikari was only a paranoid schemer to the point of almost precognition. Fortunately, the strength of Shinji Ikari, and that which set Kaoru Nagisa to envious ire, was the quality of his support staff. There was another powerful precognitive out there. Those who possessed sufficient power to predict the future to a useful extent were likewise unable to see how it would affect themselves and others like themselves. Shinji Ikari was immune to precognition for some reason. Jonathan Fresh was not. That was why the Cradle had chosen to use his mother as leverage. That's tradecraft. Just because we can't read minds doesn't mean all the practice with espionage is useless. That's why it's called intelligence, he thought, while wishing for a cigarette. He'd also swallowed a small radio emitter, the kind used to secretly mark vehicles. The biotechnicians hadn't removed it. Why would they bother? It wasn't like such a paltry signal could be detected from outside the Cradle. Not all psychers were from Tibet, Brazil and environs, after all. The church back when burning witches had also kept and used those who may be legitimately classed as such. The Royal Protestant Knights also had a history of distinguished service. He got up from the limpid pool and looked around. The cell was round and barred with tough coal-like growths. There were a lot of cells, and prisoners political or otherwise. The chamber was devoid of guards or attendants. They must all be busy elsewhere. There was a slight indoors quake. Very busy. Then the lights went out. Was it a self-fulfilling prophecy? Or simply, with Yang involved, capitalising on the enemy's arrogance? The Cradle had been so confident everyone would embrace the greater good, once they'd been enlightened to its possibilities. The thing was, they hadn't actually gotten around to brainwashing him yet. With Sawyer at their throats, there was so much else to do. At the very least, while intact, he could be used as a bargaining chip. But having been picked up for the possibilities, he was thereafter ignored as harmless. He rubbed at his arms to shake off the cold. Yes, idiots. As long as there was life, there was hope, and thus no surrender. The Prime Minister, or did his capture invalidate that, sat knees up, leaning against the wall. The living heat of the walls faded after a while. He hoped it wouldn't take too long. One burning question remained. If Nagisa's a precognitive, then he's a psyker. As an angel-human hybrid, is that even possible? Is the Trident that so different from the Ava? It at least didn't require an activation gene. It seemed a more viable, less selective weapon system than an Ava, and now with the ability to use an AT field. That was why they had to be crushed, and quickly. As a society and an industrial power, the Cradle was at the cusp of terrible potential. The Lamia dived, to gouge armour and flesh out of Unit 2's left shoulder. The werewolf slammed into it from the right. The Ava took the brunt of the impact, then rolled up and around like a matador. Its last prog knife deployed, and as it slid off the werewolf's back, it grabbed hold of the tail and cut it right off. The Warborn lost balance briefly and ate dirt. The Ava looked at the still twitching appendage and tossed it aside. It let out another hiss of breath and a demented grin. The werewolf snarled, and Krill stood up on its back. Barbed spines flew off and impaled the Evangelion. Unit 2 bellowed in pain, and even more as it tried to pull out one of the spines. Martin bull rushed it again, knocking it to the ground. The A-10 connections are all cut. The Eva has gone berserker, Dr. Thompson confirmed.
Yes, so why does it still fight like Soryu?
The young scientist compared the brain patterns between Unit 2 and 3. He nibbled on his thumbnail. Maybe... No, that can't be true. He shook his head, but his voice was contemplative. Is it possible that Soryu is already so much of a bloodthirsty berserker that her mental state is already the default condition of the Evangelion, overwriting even its own feral rage? The 15-inch screen showed a grainy camera view from the Ava's own perspective. It had both hands gripping the top of the werewolf's mouth, the trident's teeth impaling through its palms. Its right foot wedged into the Warborn's lower jaw. The view was shaky. They heard a crack. Between the two holds, the Ava was ripping the werewolf open. Its lower jaw dislocated. Then the foot slammed down, the jaw torn free. Skin and blood and muscle followed. The Warborn's attempt at a pained howl was an incoherent mess. Then the Ava began pulling out the werewolf's eyes and eating them.
You can't tell me that's still Soryu,
Wilfred continued, though unmoved by the display. The A-10 nerve connection snapped back. The chewing didn't stop. The trident Warborn Lamia flapped lazily in midair, watching.
He had thrown away his humanity for power, but still he lacked the pure ferocity of the monster.
Its pilot deeply enjoyed the irony.
Bettelheim, I have figured out what we require.
Shut up and help me! His words were garbled, for the symbiote in trying to dull the feedback could only numb his lower jaw.
We are the force of evolution, but natural selection functions best under intense competition. Nagisa was useless for the purpose of putting simulation data into practical use. He wins far too quickly.
Soryu, like Ikari, was resistant to active precognition. This wasn't a quality of Evangelion pilots, however, as Ayanami and Yamagishi weren't immune to those methods. Had Nagisa remained, he could have destabilised Soryu's mental state. The weight of numbers would have been theirs, and though unfair, the battle would quickly be over and done. Nagisa believed in the greater good, true enough, but it seemed as if he still doubted if his own followers were actually worthy of it.
You will come back to the Cradle now!
Blasted through the communal mind. Whatever additional rumination Sarah may have had was cut off as she felt something wrap around her ankles. Unit 3 and Mayumi roared.
I see Soryu is infected.
Sarah sighed as she was yanked out of the air. The other arm wrapped around her Warborn's torso, and Unit 3 leapt at the rest of the distance. The Black Ava wrapped itself around the enemy.
This again. Have you not learned that I hold the advantage here?
Mayumi's hatred was palpable. She felt violated.
This is a Type 1 Titanicus module, you bitch. Do you know what that means? I'm carrying an onboard nuclear reactor. Do you plan on going out in a blaze of glory as an offering to Soryu's victory?
Sarah shook her head.
You are as I used to be. The best we could hope for was to be remembered. Incidental figures to the story of life.
They struck the ground and bounced. It was a rather odd sight, like two fluffy monkeys tangled into a ball. They rolled, punching and headbutting at each other all the while. It was the difference between pugilists and ancient wrestlers.
We bear an original character more suited for a world at war.
The Lamia's own limbs extended, widened, and clasped around the Ava.
Your tactics have already been predicted, countered, and preempted.
Then the Lamia burned. Its feathers exploded into shards. Acid inside its body poured out of new orifices. A pity, but there would be no recovering Unit 3 for their purposes anymore. As the Evangelion died in the fatal embrace, the phoenix spasm shrugged out of its skin. It wasn't a complete skeleton, somewhat smaller, proportionally that of a child. The rest of the bones kept the Eva in a death grip. Like a wraith, it lacked legs, its spine extending out into a tail. Its arms ended in sickle-like claws, but it was never meant for escape and recovery. Given time, a complete new Warborn could be built upon a central control chassis. Both Unit 3 and the Lamia were out of the fight, vainglorious martyrs. Ava 2 wasn't faring much better. Berserker mode didn't automatically make the Ava fight any better. Asuka woke up to even more pain and damage than before her unintended rest. "This is bad," Dr. Thompson muttered. "Yamagishi, can you hear me? Are you all right?" He turned aside to the other tactical consoles. "We're getting status feeds, but we still can't get communications restored."
"The jamming's keeping us from communicating with the assault groups too,"
was Tactical 2's response. Tactical was showing that pain suppressant drugs were being pumped into the Edry plug and Yamagishi. That was Nerve Boston's automatic aid system, one which Nerve Tokyo's first-gen entry plug lacked. Soyu's brainwaves showed she was taking a hell of a lot of pain, on the verge of blacking out again. And this time, the Berserker wouldn't save her ass.
"They're just children,"
Wilfred snarled. He turned and snapped.
"Aren't you all so ashamed? I know I am."
Feckledraft was seated knees down on the floor.
"This is their war. The only thing we can give them now is our faith. They will fight because they know the odds are impossible. They will win because their will is unbreakable. Believe. No matter how strong the enemy, no matter how great the despair."
The young soldier grimaced and turned back to the screen. Martin saw Sarah fleeing back to the cradle and snorted. Useless as ever. He turned to the red Evangelion and prepared for one last charge. It was almost dead. With his spine still stabbed into its body, every movement only added further damage to its internal organs. His werewolf was slow to regenerate its own wounds. His left arm was useless and his bite was gone. He saw the scorched black form of Unit 3 try to crawl towards Unit 2 and laughed. It was a pathetic sight, like a dog crawling back to its master. Its much-vaunted flexible limbs were now shriveled stumps, and still it tried.
"So you,"
Mayumi Yamagishi croaked out. "Win." Asuka closed her eyes and felt her Evangelion. It was tired. The S2 engine was at its limits. She had nothing left. Except... Unit 2 bent down to help its fallen comrade. The jagged wolf charged. Its powerful feet were as pistons. Everything seemed to slow down. Everything rested upon one final attack. With the exposed core, Unit 2, even if it dodged, would inevitably fall to the superior regenerative properties of its enemies. The werewolf needed to settle it in one hit, for the Ava still had use of all its limbs. Unit 3 turned over. It had crawled on the dirt, in the depths of shame, but it was not completely crippled, and hadn't returned without an offering. Clasped to its chest was the G-Impact stake and a revolver cartridge. The Black Ava had lost its faceplate. Its scarred, skinless fate was bared in a rictus grin. The Red Ava returned the sentiment. "The S2 engine is a biomechanical organ. Its power is limited only by the capacity of the Ava and the pilot. Too much will destroy its organic components and the very nerves and transmission lines for its power. Brains would explode from the sudden intensity of the generated AT field. That's why the S2 engine, as designed for Unit 4, is already rated to discharge at its maximum capacity," was Ritsuko's lesson. "But it is an organ. Unlike a solid machine made of moving parts or circuits, running over capacity won't break it instantly. It will hurt. It will take a long time to heal, but it can be done." Sprang! A revolver docket ejected from the back of the Ernster Einschlag. Unit 2 slapped in the replacement. 4 Promethean cartridges fired into a compression chamber. Designed to drive a spike into the enemy through an assisting explosion, the pressures within the hammerhead pushed out the drive a bit. The conical head started to spin as Asuka forced her AT field into the chamber. "Akten! Jotun Mordekov!" Power blasted out from the Red Ava, the spines forcibly cast out from its flesh. The core at its chest was like a baleful eye. Flesh closed around it for a moment, as new pathways from the S2 engine hurriedly grew. It blinked. Had Martin Arthur Bettelheim and his jagged wolf fled from the start, they would have lived. If he'd kept going even faster to stab the Ava in a cross counter, he would have succeeded. But at that moment, seeing the bright glow in the Ava's eyes and the relaxed ease by which it lifted its great hammer, fear touched his heart. He hesitated a fraction. He did not want to die.
No! Why, Horatio, I spit upon the arbitrary discrimination in this universe. Your time is over. I am better. I am Hattie, hate, and skull, repulsion. I am the force of the inevitable. This sick and dying world deserves nothing less than to be put out of its misery.
Asuka looked up. She bore sympathetic wounds with her Ava, and blood covered her left eye.
I am the sun.
She raised her hammer high.
I will not be devoured by such as you. Eat this! Ansterschlagen!
The jagged wolf's arm stabbed out. Asuka exhaled. She felt her core crack.
Drill!
The hammer dropped.
Breaker!
The hammer slammed upon the jagged wolf's head, the drill boring into its skull, and openings around the bit ejected charged particles at relativistic speeds. The AT field interacting with the wraith bone lace of the drill funneled it all down. The strike didn't kill Martin Arthur Bettelheim, for the cockpit was at the chest after all.
I win! I claim the world!
He forced his hand into Unit 2's core. He couldn't reach.
What? Something. Is it a barrier? I cannot touch.
The particle stream kept going, eating into the ground, down into the crust, a melter equivalent. The initial charge was quickly exhausted. The drill kept spinning. The back of the hammerhead broke open, and a second stream of white-hot light sprayed out. The air around the Ava spun in a tornado. A tighter stream of piercing particles blasted from the drill tip. The initial impact created a vacuum in the compression chamber. Now the drill was converting the very flesh and bone of the enemy. The winds were drawn into that glowing funnel. Martin screamed. He was being shredded.
Must escape!
The werewolf's arm drooped away from the red Ava's chest, bent backwards, bones breaking, and was reduced to light. The shoulders of the Trident Warborn opened up, and a skeletal wraith chassis emerged. It wasn't just a vacuum. It was an intensely strong AT field, compressing and compressing, and he could see the proud form of his Warborn torn into pieces, spinning round and around into a glowing spiral. It was like trying to spin up a waterfall.
This is unfair, he mumbled sadly. This is cruel. I was never meant to survive.
Nagisa had lied. What a surprise. Not even his backup could escape. That fire, that field, it drew and rendered and spat out his very soul. This was how even Star Gods could die, in the total conversion of energy. Not even Adam and Lilith would survive, though the process would take much, much longer.
Sorry!
There was a final bright flash, an explosion of power and pressure, flattening trees for kilometres around. Unit 3 tumbled, its limbs stitching together from the excess energy in the AT field. It skidded, face down into a hill. The light faded. A ruddy red glow and plume of vapour issued forth from the slightly concaved hole at the Ava's feet. The G-impact stake clicked and retracted the drill head. Ava 2 slid the hammer into a hook at its waist and fell on its back. And Ava had a large central core and two little spheres around it. Unit 2's core showed a large crack, while the subcores had exploded into useless shards. E-core bled from holes all over its body. The ground trembled. Germany wasn't a very tectonically active region. Limping, Unit 3 approached. It had to drag the other Ava away from the new volcano it had created. The command truck knew none of this. It was tipped over to the side, ripped open and on fire. They had arrived at the very doorstep of the Earth's cradle, and no one was holding back.
Higher ground!
Wilfred led troops up a nearby hill, formed the debris from the cradle's landing.
We'll gain an advantage!
Any advantage, no matter how small, they had to take it. In numbers and firepower, the enemy already had undeniable superiority. People were continually unprepared for just how big and terrible Avas actually were when up close. The Cradle put all that to shame. At 6 kilometers in diameter, it had hundreds of levels and thousands of twisting tunnels. If urban and jungle combat was a meat grinder, the innards of the Cradle combined the worst features of each. 2 land raiders and 24 elite warriors against a population of close to 50,000. In their own mountain town that they could reshape at will, it was a death trap. There was no way in. The Cradle had a great gash, but the height and curve of the hard, matte black shell prevented attempts to climb in. At least the Cradle had stopped its counterattacks, for some reason. Wilfred clung one-handed to the turret of a Vindicator Pat and Lehman Russ. The penalty of mounting a fuck-off huge cannon in a mobile frame was that as calibre increased, the fewer shells it could actually carry, and thus a shorter duration of utility. It was the only thing keeping it from being swarmed. He wiped blood from his eyebrows. He still thought it was a pig-ugly design, but even as an officer, being infantry sucked. He looked to a nearby Hydra and grinned. Pilots so loathed having to do support for ground attacks. Big tanks only meant juicy targets for those flyboys.
Let's see them dodge lasers!
He no longer feared death, but still, it was a good time to be alive. He frowned as a large skeletal shape flew past and melted into the dark material.
This is getting ridiculous,
he said, completely overlooking again that he should have to have reloaded some time after shooting burst after burst. He had, however, found a hat along the way. It was a nice hat. It made him forget about little trifles like that.
How many last stands is a man supposed to get, anyway?
At least one more, Lama Feckledraft said, emerging from the turret. Back in Tibet, he taught probability mechanics. The stabbing and leaping and the deluding themselves into invulnerability. He left that to the young and young at heart. It was the same trick he used as shield against Gulfer. As the enemy approached, the chances of their coil guns misfiring or exploding in their hands increased, until they aimed it at the region of effect, at which point the odds became 1.
We're alive. Does this mean so you won?
My colleagues are surely causing the Cradle no end of intestinal pain. I felt something of massive psychic presence approach. Was it one of the Warborns?
Likely. Too big to be anything else, really.
He leaned with his back to the turret, listening to the crew inside gather reports in a language he didn't understand.
Those inside have bigger problems now.
The old monk sighed and rubbed at his bald head.
We had always known it would end at the fortress of Black Stone. The walls of the city fortress over Tokyo and the final bulwark. It seemed so obvious. This place also qualifies. It ends here. We end here.
The young soldier slid down to the hull, bone-tired. He took off his hat, and it really was a very nice hat, black leather with red trim, and fanned with it.
They'll go down making a difference, but it's still sad.
Well, it was the very same thing he'd advocated earlier. It was still such a goddamn waste. Good people had to die because the enemy was too many.
4,000 years you people were waiting for this? Really?
What's the most frightening thing, Camphor?
Not death, certainly. Failure? Torture? Ghosts?
I guess being helpless would do it. If you're powerless, you pretty much have to fear everything.
He chuckled.
In short, life.
The most terrible thing was that there would be no coincidences. None. Never has been, never will be.
That was enough to make even Wilfred wince.
Humanity has been waiting for this. Jewish, Christian, Hindu, Buddhist, Chinese, African, British. All and the more, it doesn't matter. Javal was just the most recent repository of an ancient legacy. But it's for good reason that to believe in fate is called fatalism.
At the distance were 2 stick-like shapes, dipping in and out of the horizon. Soon a small earthquake made itself known, increasing in frequency and intensity. Though, like many of the world's conventional military, Wilfred resented how an Ava could quickly make even his best efforts obsolete. He also as quickly realised what an Evangelion truly was. They were man's physical oath to kick fate in the balls. Here they come. And they were running. A few minutes later, Sarah Campbell appeared on the core level, striding up to Dr. Lader's mechanical grotto. The scientist had downloaded a portion of his mind into another construct. In Earth's Cradle, everyone pulled weight. He had fought and died thousands of times, with combat drones and even as doors, all to slow the enemy's progress.
Damnation!
he shouted into the mind like,
"Where is my support?"
A few seconds of reflection later brought the answer. Dead. Force blades cut down to the very soul. Fortunately, there were plenty of backups. It was the least literal of the Cradle's promises of immortality, but it would suffice.
I see that the evacuation pods are full, Doctor. Have you loaded your own patents into it?
And I see Bettelheim has fallen. His backup has garbled. Damn these probability shifters!
If you had not reduced the flow from the second core, he might have had greater ability to neutralize Soyuz S2 engine back their T-field.
Whatever! He was never more than a dumb animal anyway.
Sarah frowned, slightly. Her expression, wide, dark eyes framed by her short raven hair, was like that of Cleopatra before an asp. Slowly she walked up to the raised platform. The various assistants did nothing, busy with their own efforts at damage control. It was a while before Dr. Leda noticed her proximity.
What do you want now? You have your orders. There are some spare battle suits. Go make yourself useful.
You have been throwing women and children at the invaders to destabilize them psychologically.
It seems to be working. If avoided more direct access points. There are plenty of backups.
She pushed him aside. The physical construct was low priority on his gestalt, doing low-level processing than running simulations beforehand. It was also pretty handy as a combat form. The bullets bounced off an AT field. She took his wrist and broke it right off, the monomal cleaver claws along with them. The Cradle had redundancies all over, but even its biocomputing required a place for primary processing. The command center was in the level directly above the Cradle's core, but that was for the benefit of those who chose not to submerge themselves fully into the mind.
Cradle of Earth, hear me. Authorization overrides Sophia.
There was a rumbling all over the Cradle, and everyone connected to the Cradle mind felt a rush of power. Leda gnashed as the charge drained away from the super laser.
Initiate void protocols.
Nagisa could never connect to the hive mind, but by painstaking mapping of his brain's every neuron, it possessed a template of its personality. No reason to get excited, the mind spoke kindly, as if to Shinji Akagi. There are many here among us who feel that life is but a joke, but you and I have been through that, and this is not our fate. The shaking intensified, and the second core, the one once known as Bardial, cracked and burst into a shower of glowing yellow moulds.
What have you done?
Screamed Dr. Leda, clutching under the hood of his robe. He was booted right out of the Cradle mind and confined to just one head.
So you approach us and you divert energy from our defenses? A backdoor? It's impossible! Such a thing cannot hide from me!
You forget, Doctor, that the Cradle is not a computer or a matrix of personalities. It is fundamentally an angel.
Sarah pointed to the remaining core.
There is no point in fighting for this location. Our plans may be laid anywhere.
Let us not talk falsely now, the mind said to Dr. Leda. The hour is getting late.
Shut up! Enough with the meaningless pop culture! Damn you, Nagisa! This is treachery! You have betrayed the greater good! You hypocrite!
We all serve a purpose, Doctor. You ultimately serve as a lesson. You have monopolized the Cradle mind for too long, and will stand as the peril of too much individualism and megalomania given free rein. Goals are one thing, and ambition another.
And are you any better? Nagisa!
Nagisa's template in the mind was fading, his voice turning back into the thousand voices. We will leave now. From the Cradle a new humanity shall wake. Evolution and natural selection only functions when there's competition. Now we cannot go back. They will hate us. They will pursue us. Now we have no choice but become stronger with every generation. And they want to defeat us. They will have to become like us. The seed of conflict must be sown for us to grow. The blast doors into the Cradle core burst inward. A shrunken old man walked into the chamber, his walking stick tapping with every step.
We congratulate you for getting here,
Sarah called out to them.
But sadly, you have destroyed the only chance of third impact not happening. We will leave this world now. It is yours to defend. You have my condolences.
Kill them! Kill them! All of them!
Dr. Lader screamed at the technicians. The robed, multi-lensed figures looked at each other, then deployed auxiliary combat appendages. They leapt, crawling vertically down steep walls, sickle arms flashing in the dim light. Sarah Campbell shook her head and disintegrated as well into a column of softly glowing particles. Dr. Lader screamed and screamed as he felt his memory backups and physical redundancies being erased. Live, was the last message. Cling to life for as long as you can. The power of the cradle is all yours now. Do with it as you will.
I will not accept this indignity! You will suffer! You will all suffer!
His construct writhed on the ground, while his mind cast about for any other shell, and found it.
Ha! That construct! It remains pristine! All the effort into making its control cluster repellent of psychic attacks also prevented any outside manipulation!
His contemptible human-shaped shell burst into mechanical parts and gore. A sphere, about 500 meters across, rolls from the very top of the cradle and out into space. Nothing lived in that pod. It didn't possess a single controlling mind like Adam or Lilith. Intelligence-like, but it was a complete seed nonetheless. The two Evangelion pushed through the cradle's AT field. It was like having to swim through a viscous liquid. The core section of the cradle was a large oblate chamber. The very top of the ceiling was shrouded in darkness. 16 glowing green eyes became aware. Dr. Lader's final form lowered from its nest. Hooked and multi-sectioned jaws capable of chewing through Terminator armor chittered angrily. Barbed and poison-filled hair protruded from 8 spindly legs.
What? A boss fight? Is this necessary? The Sunshine Kid muttered. 4,000 years, and still no respect.
Curly Krishna looked back at his own that remained. Pagnor, his dark skin showing bright red gashes. Man of peace, his proud long white beard cut off in ragged clumps. Helmeted warriors, their eyes betraying just how young and afraid they truly were. He turned and looked up at the nearest Heraclitus. The mercenary had shown no less stubborn, stupid bravery than the shining fools he had so trained. The armour was broken in places, Mima bundles cut, and even the helmet had split open.
Valda! Spider Slayer you will not be. What?
Constantine looked confused, then angry.
No, this is my duty as custodian, grandfather. We will fight to the end and purge these aliens. Your duty? Not to die by my side, to live, to stand by the protector of man. Go and tell your master this. Remember he must. Innocence he has regained, but now humanity needs his full awareness again. What he has abandoned to history, accept it back. Accept it, he must. Sir?
The old man turned to Lama Pagnor, who seemed pained at having to obey. The last wish of a man that had been father and grandfather to them all. The warrior couldn't refuse that. Even his own pride, his own will, was a paltry thing.
If any respect you ever had for me, do this you will.
The golden-armoured giants of the Terminatus Legio were held by the remaining Psykana, and all vanished in a forced teleport.
4,000 years, huh? Worth the wait it was.
He ran as fast as his short old legs would allow, past the stabbing limbs of a gargantuan spider. The creature crashed, its legs cauterized stumps behind him. Not slowing down, he threw himself into the gash in Iriel's blue core. The core turned green. He had lived, and it was a good death. The AT field impeding the Evangelion's progress abruptly died. Wilfred pushed off the ground, heaving for breath. The ungodly pressure. Now the rush of air back into lungs. He felt lightheaded. He turned to lie flat on his back, and saw the monstrous form of the Ava, Unit 2 and its great hammer, silhouetted against the sun. If there was indeed a tragic cycle.
She's 4, isn't she?
He asked aside. Yep, was all Lama Feckledraft could say.
Kama hash critched mash. Load cartridge, damn it! Jowl!
The revolver docket had 3 cartridges bearing a very familiar symbol. The Ava was a weapon of so much mass destruction in itself that Californium slugs didn't really add that much to its destructive power. It was still ridiculous. The Cradle had a diameter of 6 kilometers, 6,000 meters, while the Ava didn't even approach 100. It was like a mouse trying to challenge an elephant, and unlike said elephant, the thick ablative shell of the Cradle had no assorted vulnerables to damage. Asuka took one last look around her. The miasma had completely dissipated by then, and the broken, blackened terrain extended for as far as she could see. The only green she could see was at the tips of distant hills and the tanks pulling away from her location. A plume of acrid smoke was rising over the horizon, but that wasn't her problem. Mayumi was herding the troops off to safety. Though the Black Ava's arms were still gangly strings, its AT field was strong enough. She could feel angry, but she felt only pity. For all the Cradle's boasts, for all their tricks and their treachery. In the end, nothing. With one stroke, she would end it all. It was monstrously unfair. The Earth's cradle was empty. The walls were dissolving into a discoloured muck, flooding the many chambers. Leda screamed as he forced his mind into the very essence of the cradle. He was utterly alone, and that had its upsides. For the Earth's cradle was Irurel's body. So much power there, his alone. Nagisa was being unexpectedly generous, or cruel in his irony. The old abbot had destroyed the angel core, passing the burden of its existence into Leda. Though the man had always despised his human form, the post-humanist nature of the cradle mind was just that of a monster. All the power, none of the control. The ablative shell began to flake off in massive clumps. The pieces burst into black powder on the ground, burying it under concealing dust. It rose high enough to cover even the Ava standing nearby. Soon a rough shape emerged. No longer just a wounded sphere. The curved portions looked like that of a turtle shell. A beaked face started to show. Asuka put her hammer down. She took slow, measured steps until her Ava was completely under its shadow.
You in there! You're powerful! I'm not going to deny that!
She projected with her AT field, and the vibrations carried through the shell.
Are you one mind or many? It doesn't really matter anyway. You have killed so many people. You have despoiled this land. You've lured people with false promises and attacked others when their guard was down. But you know what really pissed me off? You're not the first one to try that. It's what nations do. Hell inside that thing. It's sovereign territory. You were just trying to make yourselves a legitimate power. We pushed first. You pushed back hard. And now I get to decide. Do I push you over? Make you fall down? Do I push so hard no one should ever even dare to dream about pulling this sort of bullshit again? You pull out a knife, we pull out a gun. You kick my people, I eat your eyes. Brutality answered with brutality. Kill and kill and kill, until no one is there to complain.
Legends about the pilots had already flown all over the world. Sawyer was the best of them in pure combat, but that was only theoretical. She never really killed any angel on her own. That she hesitated there was what allowed others to see that she was more than just a weapon to point at the enemy. Those watching a short distance away already understood. It was the very first combined arms operation involving an Evangelion. The Ava had changed the face of warfare. An Ava pilot, by default, had power to equal that of a general. It wasn't like anything could be done to stop them, short of launching nuke-level attacks at your own troops. The Ava pilot, as a warrior, also had to be a leader.
I am not anybody's weapon. The Ava's not a toy for war, and history's not about who's right and wrong. Who the hell do you bastards think I am? All this suffering could have been prevented. I don't goddamn enjoy having to do this. We're not perfect. Our society has a lot of problems. I can see why you think it's better to just give up and start all over again. At the start you wanted peace and acceptance, didn't you? That's why I'm not giving you this last chance. It's something we both have to sacrifice. Our pride, our hatred. It's just going to keep feeding the fire, wasting lives. War gets deadlier, but war never changes. Stop this, please. Don't make me do this. You took my country apart. I know you have the power to put it back together again. Become a symbol of life instead of death. The Ava, its power. Let's have a world where there wouldn't be any need for me.
The air grew unnaturally still. The Cradle was a nation unto itself. That would not be too hard to argue. Did Sawyer realise what she was asking? Surrender wasn't a capitulation to terms. She'd become the de facto ruler of a power to rival even the cities she had left, indeed any nation on the planet. Europe was in shambles. Many armies and capital cities had already crumbled under its onslaught. The UN wouldn't be in a position to resist. Sawyer as an ally was infinitely better than an enemy. Conqueror, saviour, princess, emperor. These possibilities hinged on that moment. Dr. Leda knew this, the simulations running in reflex. Unlike Nagisa, she could be trusted to keep her word, and there was still the open possibility of actually influencing her decisions. She had honour, in the purest chivalric sense. He wondered briefly if the situation was Nagisa's way of saying, "I'm sorry," or "marry me." Leda had never been loyal to anyone but himself. He was never going to be a leader, to be looked upon with awe and dread. He could still be great, but it would take finally setting aside his gargantuan pride and serving with faith. He made his choice.
You are deluded, saw you!
He was a physical god. 3 kilometers thickness buffered him from the outside. The boarding action from earlier would no longer be effective. He didn't have to worry about preserving assets for the greater good.
There is no victory here. The greatest mercy I can give is to burn this putrid land before you set loose ancient powers you cannot comprehend. That aver you bear, the price of its power, will be far more than you will be willing to pay. The source of all life is the primordial chaos, and its darkness and malevolence you will experience in mortal flesh. No! I will not bear the burden of your folly. I will burn this land and take the moon from the sky. I refuse to perish alongside this doomed world. I am immortal, a prince of the universe. I refuse.
Eyes appeared all over the dark shell.
I cannot be caged.
Wicked energies poured out from the irises, cutting into the ground, searching for little creatures to burn.
I cannot be controlled!
There was a trembling and great roots broke the earth. Like a seed pod, the cradle began to rise.
Understand this as you die! Ever pathetic! Ever fools!
Large bombardment spheres, like those wielded by Sahakril, grew from the carapace. 2 Avers wouldn't be able to pull off the multi-strand homing laser trick, and he could ensure that the terrors in the night will continue to plague humanity in physical form. Asuka sighed. Gnarled roots, in size dwarfing even her Ava, whipped around. Those that sprang at her Ava fell apart in pieces before reaching her. This despite her hammer had no cutting edges whatsoever.
We are not afraid.
She looked up, hefting her hammer with both hands.
I said it before, I don't care. Bring it if we have to. We'll hammer heaven, hammer hell, reduce all obstacles into light. This is our world. This is the path we've chosen. We shall fight against the tide of genocide and break through into tomorrow.
She felt a presence inside her plug, hands over her own grip on the control handles.
Is it something to be proud of, being a destroyer? To be the best at it?
She thought of those waiting for her to return and felt approval.
The fires consume, but also clear the way. Someone has to blaze the path to renewal, and it's ours.
It was still ridiculous. She was going to break something nearly solid all the way through, a city in itself, with one hammer. The core was even off-centre, so anything other than a direct hit would be as futile as spitting at a glacier. Everything about it, even the AT field, had such overwhelming superiority. The drill head spun, and a miniature tornado formed around the Ava, blowing aside the dust and debris. Asuka forced her will into the chamber, compressing the promethium and Californium mix until she held the equivalent of an infant sun. The back of the hammerhead ignited into swirling ribbons of flame. Dr. Leda was reminded of the new volcano not too far away.
I see you.
The Ava raised the hammer over its head and seemed to grin. Down below, someone took off his hat and whooped with joy.
Impossible!
The mind that remained of a man looked towards the green core.
I still have my AT field! A psychic cannot! There's a hole in the field!
He might as well have a bullseye painted on his forehead.
She can't be! She's just going to completely blast through the walls!
Spin on! Einsteigen!
Unit 2 leapt, whirled about in the air to add the momentum of rotation into the blow.
Pierce and smash with all your might, with all our hopes, all our dreams and all our sorrow! Take this, the anger of the billions!
Whoosh! The contact point erupted into plasma. The cradle could shrug off megatons of energy even inside, but being liquid-filled, the shock travelled through all its many cavities. That empty space near the centre crumpled inwards. The flames ate into the black egg, expanding, growing in strength and ferocity. It may have been a few centimetres at the contact point, but when it blasted through the back of the cradle, it was at least a kilometre round. It kept going, past the horizon and out into space. Someone standing on the moon's surface would have seen a burning thread lancing out into the void, streaking right past the moon's orbit, going on and on as long as that girl on the ground screamed and raged and cursed herself and all humanity for being such blind and careless fools. The point of impact was a nuclear explosion, and a shockwave blossomed outward, rocking tanks on their treads. The sky was on fire, and the air screamed. It was just a few seconds, and then it was done. The cradle was hollowed out, and it collapsed under its own weight in thunderous fragments. The Red Ava slumped to its knees, its steaming hammer dropping from nerveless fingers. It was done. She'd done her duty. She'd avenged so many. So why did she feel no relief?
This is just the beginning,
she thought.
The beginning of the end. Kaoru, what else have you done? We're a wretched people, but for how much longer are you going to throw that into our faces?
Strong arms caught her before she dropped face down. Hugging was awkward in Evangelion scales, but Mayumi didn't care.
Soya-senpai, are you alright? It's over. We won!
We won! That statement reverberated among the gathered defenders and soon throughout all Europe. The price was bitter, but there was no question about it. The Ava was humanity's own, and the nations of the world could unite against the common foe. The face of war was a red-haired teenage girl, perhaps brash and stupidly competitive even at the best of times, but if there was a force, a trinity of golden power adrift in the world, then she held courage aplenty. A seed drifted in interplanetary space, invisible to all forms of detection. It floated discreetly towards the sun, bathing in its invisible streams of energy. Power it needed, and terrible shall be its return. There was still a communications blackout across the continent and into the east. Military facilities all over Europe were in shambles. It took some time, but eventually word arrived. The Avas had all failed. Magnus Tancred had fallen in the line of duty. Tokyo 3 was burning. The terminal dogma had been breached. The Magi screamed its anguish into the ragged, sliced-off ends of the international network.